here joining us today. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our chair, Pavlina, to introduce the panel, and then the project team can go ahead and start.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to UDAAP. We're looking forward to seeing your project. With me today are Sharon Bradley, landscape architect, and Storm, we are architects and planners. Please introduce your team and specifically the people that are going to be presenting. And as you go through your presentation, this being sort of its first review, make sure to follow, some of the bigger picture conditions, some of your process and thinking of how you got to where you were. This will allow us to get on board with the beginning of your proposal. And in general, try to keep the front end presentation to about 20-25 minutes. This will give us ample time for Q&A and discussion after that. We can always go back to certain slides and drill on detail, but the quicker we can get through the initial presentation, the more time we'll have to talk about it. Without any further ado, please take it away.
For sure. So my name is Sean Miller with Kimley Horn. I'm the project manager on the civil engineering side. I will not be presenting today, but wanted to just introduce the team and kind of get an intro started. So Mr. Zach Lett with Kimley Horn is our professional landscape architect who will be leading the presentation today. So I'll let him take it away in a little bit. Bob Brooks with Kimley Horn as well as a landscape architect who has been working on the project and is on the team, can add a little bit to the presentation if needed. And then Mr. Ryan Humphrey is here from the development side with Stonewall Capital, the current landowner and developer for a lot of One Westport. And then Mr. Al Berry is here as a consultant to Stonewall Capital. And so Al is actually going to introduce the project and the previous master plan. So Al, I'll let you take it away before Zach shares the screen and starts presenting.
I should say, because we realized that we reviewed this a few years ago, it's not the first presentation, but it is the first presentation in a few years.
Correct.
So I think it will be really good for the benefit of also of panelists who have not been here before. We have some kind of course, documentation and understanding of where the project left off a few years ago, but we know things have changed. So it's important to really, in a way, treat it as if it's the first one. Again, I think that'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Yep. So yeah, Al, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Good morning, Al. It's a little quiet. If you can get either closer or...
Can you hear me now?
We'll turn up the volume. How about that? We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Very quickly, Pavlina said this was a project that was reviewed several years ago. For those panelists who were not part of that, this project really, and the property goes back over 20-25 years when it was originally approved by the city for almost 2,500 units and hundreds of thousands of square feet of office and retail space. It was called, I think at the time, Xanadu on the Patapsco. The property was foreclosed on. It was bought by the developers of the Port Covington property, which really never had, to my knowledge, any planning part of it with the city. It was bought by Stonewall Capital a number of years ago, and who developed a master plan that went before your panel. Things stalled, frankly, for 2 years because of a dispute over maglev and a condemnation process that maglev that would have really stopped the project in many respects. That was settled, fortunately. The maglev that you may have heard about when the first master plan came up is really going to be, if it happens at all, an underground tunnel. So it doesn't affect the land planning in any way that you're going to be hearing today. The big change that you're going to see today, and the reason for it, is the parcels to the north, C, D, E, and F. And those parcels were originally proposed as mixed use, mid-rise office and residential, mostly apartments. And with the economy being what it is, the delay in maglev, it's become evident to us that we think singles, in this case, going to baseball playoffs rather than a home run, that may or may not happen into the future is a more prudent way to go. And it frankly reinforces the One Westport concept, which was dealing with the existing neighborhood, which is a single family neighborhood that we're working with, and take the commercial that was possibly anticipated on the ground floor of the multifamily buildings, which obviously would not fit into a townhouse scenario, and move that to parcel A that you'll be hearing about in a little bit. Parcel A was the parcel that's along Waterview Avenue. We're in discussions with the Community Development Corporation of Westport to transfer that property to them for a larger footprint commercial building, which we think is appropriate because of the access on Waterview Avenue. We also believe the more we thought about it, that commercial in this part of the project might also detract from the neighborhood's master plan, which is to have commercial on Annapolis Road, which is sort of the historic commercial corridor for Westport. So those are the main reasons for the changes you'll see. I will say that there's been a lot of work over the last several months to integrate this, obviously, with the Westport Waterfront Park, which is being donated by Stonewall to the city. Ultimately, it will be redeveloped and managed by the city. And there may be some discussion about opportunities within the park for that type of retail to support the park, much less this development. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean Miller.
Zach, go ahead and take it away.
All right, great. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I'm going to actually turn my camera off because I'm going to be looking down at my notes and stare at the top of my head the rest of the time. So I appreciate the time today. I appreciate the feedback that we've got on the project. Can everyone see the screen? There's a slide of the master plan up. Okay, great. All right, excellent. So following up on Al's points about the project overview, it's a 43-acre parcel that's part of the redevelopment initiatives that Al described through community engagement and an opportunity. I'll flip through some slides that show the project location a little bit more in depth as we move through, but it's basically on the west shore of the middle branch of the Patapsco in that kind of 295, 395, 95 corridor, just south of the Inner Harbor. The original master plan was for multifamily apartments, market rate dwelling units, senior apartments, retail, office, public parks, and a waterfront promenade. But I think the key initiative is reconnecting the waterfront through parks and trails and communities, back to the city, where this is a bit isolated now. So on the left-hand side of the slide, there's the proposed density as the plan as we're going to present today. 17,000 square feet of proposed commercial space. There's 140 multifamily units, 90 of which are senior living, 50 of which are traditional multifamily. Parcel B is 246 for sale townhouse units, and parcel C, D, E, and F are 126. We have two alternative plans we'll walk through today. Plan A is 126 and 132 condos. Plan B is 131 townhouse units and 136 condos. To the right-hand side of the slide is just a synopsis of what the original approved master plan looked like. And I won't go through the details, everyone can see it, but this plan, as I was mentioning, is market responsive, a little bit lower density, higher focus on the urban space and the trails, and we feel that this plan does a really good job of connecting the neighborhood to a lot of the community assets we'll go through further in depth as we move through the presentation. Site context, big scale, really big scale, 2,000 scale. This is the project site. So this is the middle branch of the Patapsco. This is 95 as it comes up, and 395 crosses over into the Inner Harbor. This is the end of the BW Parkway, or 295, coming to term in at 95 here. I can zoom in a bit. This is the Hanover Street Bridge. So project is incredibly well located. We'll talk a little bit more specific about land use, but just from kind of land massing colors in the graphic, you can see that the Westport neighborhood is fairly isolated, surrounded by some public uses and some industrial sites, which I'll get into a little bit further. Our slides that are back up here. Zooming in another level, just giving the context of the surrounding neighborhoods as they exist within the city. So this is 295. This is the Westport site as it sits just to the east of 295, south of 95, and the 395 interchanges here. This is the Ravens Stadium off in the distance as we enter into the Inner Harbor, just a little bit further to the north of the site. The Cherry Hill neighborhood is off to the southeast. This is Waterview Drive, which makes that connection, which is also an interchange back to the highway system, and some of the adjacent surrounding neighborhoods. The property is a little isolated, as you can see in the slides. So this is the project site. Annapolis Road connects back towards downtown, the Inner Harbor communities. The two sites that punch over from the existing Westport neighborhood that we use the term punch over to connect to this proposed project is Clare Street to the north. So north is now Plan Right. And just for the remainder of most of the graphics in this presentation, north will be Plan Right throughout the remainder of the presentation. South will be Plan Left. So the Baltimore Parkway is along the top, the BW Parkway is along the top of the sheet. 95 is off to the right, and Waterview Avenue. As we mentioned, Waterview Avenue is a connection back to the BW Parkway. Cloman Street is along the project frontage, and I'll zoom in here a little bit further. So Windburn Street is the connection that goes from Annapolis Road through, and this is currently an at-grade crossing that we'll examine a little further when we get into the presentation and some of the existing site photos. But both of these connections at Clare and at Windburn are at grade. And we have an exhibit further in the presentation that demonstrates this, but you have a lot going on here with the rail lines. This is the CSX track coming up and it swoops to the west. And then this is the MTA light rail that rides along here. This is the Westport station specifically. And we have a graphic that exhibits this. Part of this is elevated and then part of it comes back to grade. And I think that's key to focus on as we move through the presentation, as understanding the constraint that creates and the fluidity of the community from a vehicular and a pedestrian connectivity standpoint. It's critical, and it's been a key initiative of the master plan in the past that connection's made. So kind of simplistically, working from west to east or plan north to south, existing neighborhood of traditional row homes with some connections and some kind of green space, rail line, existing roadway, rail line, Cloman. So there's a lot going on here. You can see it's a fairly industrial area. There's some laid out areas and substations that kind of flank to the north and south of Clare Street. And then the big asset to the south is obviously the Patapsco and some of the views that come with that. In particular, related to the site, just working left to right or south to north, parcel A is just over 4 acres, 4.03. Parcel B is 11.69. Parcel C is 3.04. Parcel D is 1.8. Parcel E is 204 and F is 4.44. With this, the property that Field Operations is currently designing for the waterfront master plan, which includes a public park here, a promenade across the frontage, and then back into Waterview Park. So just some additional context there, more of a technical drawing. Site connections. Again, I touched on this a second ago, but I think this is critical to understand. Done a lot of projects. This is very unique. So Annapolis Road from the top connecting back downtown with Windburn Street and Clare Street. This is Clare here to the plan right. Cloman exists currently between Windburn and Clare. It does not extend to the south to make the connection at Waterview in its existing condition. This is a vacant site area across the frontage here in the existing parcels. So the parcels, the subject parcels are outlined here in red as A, B, C, D, E, and F. The existing pedestrian access and the proposed pedestrian access points across these transportation routes are here along Waterview Avenue, at Winburn Street, and at Clare. I think the other key thing to note here is the trail system. So there's an existing trail system in Waterview Park that becomes the subject of the much larger trail system that's associated with the public, or with the waterfront park master plan, which we'll get into a little further. It really lights this area up from a connectivity standpoint for quality pedestrian connections. And makes the rail much more accessible, the rail line station much more accessible. The surface level rail is the orange dots that pass through. So the station's at surface, and then the station is raised through this connection. And then as we move into Clare, the station goes back on the surface. So it's fairly complex, and we'll get into what that means for the project as we move through the slides. Additional connections, kind of zooming out to more of a vehicular connection setup, and we'll talk about land use as we get to the west or the plan north of the BW Parkway. 2 light rail stations walkable to the site. These red and light gray boxes across the bottom are the site, is the Westport parcels that are the subject of the discussion. BW Parkway 95 here. And then 395 coming back into the Inner Harbor. Just for reference, this is Topgolf. And Annapolis Road comes back into the industrial area south of the Inner Harbor. So, I mean, to say that the site is a superior location, I think would be an understatement. It's an incredibly well located site with the amenity of the park and the Patapsco River. Taking a look at adjacent land uses, this is the project site again. So there's a sliver of residential in the Westport neighborhood and to the west of 295. But for the most part, the Patapsco River and industrial space kind of hug the site on the other sides of the site. There's a small commercial retail component here at the corner of Waterview Avenue and what will be improved Cloman, and then Waterview Park. So this site as proposed really creates a vital link to the amenity and the asset that the MTA line has in the existing parks, as well as continuation of the residential, and then meeting some of those comp plan initiatives of providing waterfront access, which is currently absent in this location. Site photos. These are the keys of the site photos that we took. So again, just orienting everyone to the project. Parcel A to the left, B is in the center. It's the larger of the tracks, C, D, E, and F, working our way up. And I'll get into each one of these just to give some site character and some context. So these are shots on the north side of the site, north being plan right in this application. This is from parcel F, looking across the site to the Clare Street crossing. So you can get a sense of kind of what it looks like when you're crossing Clare Street. This is Cloman in the background, and then this is the site. This is the MTA line going overhead, the light rail in that location. B is looking back out of our site up Clare Street. So you see some industrial uses flanking both sides of Clare Street to the north and south, or right and left in this application. And then 3 looks back across at the Spring Garden Swing Bridge. I have a hard time saying that. I apologize. Which is part of the subject of the waterfront master plan and what that looks like. So this is the north end of our site. Photos 2 through 6, still in that same area. So this is looking across our parcel F, back at the substation, the Exelon substation, in that location. Photo 5 looks back down at the adjacent substation and the light rail. You can see kind of faintly in the distance here. Let me grab my highlighter because I think this is important to note. the light rail coming back down off of its elevated surface back down to grade here. You can see that running. And so if you want to get a better understanding of what that looks like when we circulate the presentation, you'll be able to see that relationship. It takes a little bit of time to dive in to understand it. And then photo 6, I know I'm bouncing around here, is off parcel D, just looking back out at the Patapsco River. These two columns you see in the background are the Hanover Street Bridge. Moving further south into the project, this is actually a pretty good shot of a light rail. So this is parcel D looking back at the light rail. This is the station off in the distance. So you can see the rail coming back down to grade. Photo 8 looks from the park site back at that light rail station. And you can see the existing Westport townhouses in the background. So here's your substation off to the right. Here's the existing neighborhood off to the left. And you can see the relationship of the crossings that we're contending with on the project. And then photo 9 is from parcel B looking back at the Patapsco River. This looked to be a much more sunny day than the last series of photos. And then to the south, this is looking back at the light rail station. So this is our existing crossing at Weyburn Street. You can get a sense of what that looks like. These are some of the Westport townhouses in the background. This is the CSX line in the foreground, and then this is Cloman as it exists today, with the light rail elevated. Parcel B, this is looking back across parcel B. You can get a sense for the scale of the site in this photo. That's a 395 overpass off in the distance and the inner harbor in the far background there. And then you can get a shot of from the neighborhood, from parcel A looking back across the neighborhood, and actually the light rail station is there in the background. So lots going on here. So there's a lot of transportation things happening. And then the final series of photos here, this is the intersection of what will be Clement on the backside looking back at parcel A in photo 13. So this is the project site here to the right. And then just some character photos from Waterview Avenue. This is an existing BP station and some associated retail there. And then taking a look back west towards the site, this is Waterview Park off to the right along Waterview Avenue. So getting into the proposal specifically, the site plan and sections, some of our design goals were to provide a community that integrates seamlessly with the waterfront trail and public park. As we see, I think everyone knows that that's a critical aspect to both the existing community and the proposed community. It's a great site. It has some with the water, the park designed by Field Operations. It has some really key features that are going to be great for the community. Housing near public transit. I mean, currently this site is vacant. So this proposal provides housing near public transit will hopefully increase the ridership of the light rail system. It connects the existing grid system from the existing Westport neighborhood to the waterfront. It's a continuation of Baltimore City's kind of iconic row house neighborhood tradition. And it provides a diversity of housing types, both for rent and for sale. And it'll amplify some of the existing commercial corridor along Waterview Avenue. The additional residents in this space will only make those community assets stronger and make the commercial more viable in this corridor. So this is the original proposed master plan as it was originally envisioned. Back to orientation, this is Cloman Street working its way along the combination rail lines. This is parcel A at Waterview here. This is parcel B, C, D, E, and F as we work our way south to north or plan left to right. You can get a sense for the connections. Connections remain the same at Clare and Wimburn Street, and the improvements of the street system proposed by the project, and we'll get into that in more detail as we move forward. Again, just kind of a snapshot of some of the critical points of the waterfront master plan. Wetlands habitats, kind of an area for beach surge, swales and open spaces, the trail and open space network, which I think has been kind of the key focus of our initiatives from a design standpoint, and working alongside with field operations and the work that they're doing for the city. Legacy structures with the swing bridge, and then you know the additional recreation, high quality recreation space that this project creates. Getting in a little bit more detail about the Reinventing Cloman Street initiative that's a part of this. So this graphic does a pretty strong job of spelling this out. So you have an existing 50-foot right of way of CSX with multiple what we call legacy at-grade crossings. And then the light rail, which is a 24-foot right of way, which is a trestle structure with an underpass and a station platform that's 18 feet above grade. And then the existing Cloman Street is really too narrow for a complete streets initiative. It's flanked by grade walls. There's multiple waterfront crossings, or multiple railroad crossings, and it's limiting access to the waterfront. Proposed solution provides a safe pedestrian connection between Waterview and Weyburn along Cloman Street. It's a complete street. It'll create a four-way intersection at those existing streets, which I think is important. Now it's a little haphazard. It'll provide safe ADA accessibility to the pedestrian zones, and ultimately connecting the existing neighborhood to light rail, to the park space. And then as we mentioned, the right of way accommodates the complete street program, both within the project and along Cloman.
Zach, could you please zoom in some of these drawings, especially the ones that are showing a very large scale? It's kind of hard to see because even the slide isn't full screened. So
Okay.
to the extent to which you can zoom in and out of drawings, that would really help us when you point to something that's very small on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Before we get into some of the more detailed parts of the proposal, is there anything I need to go back and recap that would be helpful for the group?
No, everything was very helpful, and I thank you for a very clear presentation. It's just the screen and being able to see things that are kind of on the large scale. But I do want to time check you. I just want to make sure that we have some time to talk through stuff. So maybe try to go through the rest in about 10 minutes and no more, and then we can come back then and zoom in and kind of talk about things. Thank you.
Okay, great. No, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. So this is our proposed site plan A, and I'll zoom in here to get more context. So to my page here. So parcel B or parcel A is to the left-hand side. It is showing 17,000 square feet of commercial uses, and then the 140 multifamily uses that we had previously discussed. And I know there is a specific presentation on this later, as well as the park. So I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on that. Parcel B is showing the for sale townhouses, 246 for sale townhouses. And then parcel C, D, E, and F are there's two options that I'll flip through here today related to that. In general, there's minor adjustments in both density and layout between the two. We've superimposed a illustration, kind of an in-progress illustration of each one of these from field operations is kind of where the plan stands now. So just high level, Cloman comes through as the complete street we were mentioning before. This is improved Clare. This is improved Wenburn. And then there's the existing streets, or the proposed streets and alleys that are a component of the project. The proposal for the residential housing in parcels B, C, D, E, and F is alley loaded row home project or projects, which is consistent with a lot of the other projects similar to this that have been constructed in the city. Flip through the next slide. The material difference in the land plan between our concept A and concept B is here along the northern frontage or plan east of the waterfront park design. And that is providing a public street along the frontage, which you're seeing here. And B, I'm going to flip back and forth. I don't know why we're panning. Sorry about that. I don't know why my slide's panning. Let's see if I can get the right tool up here. So this is loading units on a muse space with a public sidewalk directly along the frontage. If I flip back, this is putting a public road in front of the, between the proposed housing units and the public park space. I just wanted to clarify what that change was. Continuing on. This is a highlight of what the pedestrian circulation system will look like with this proposal. So the pink lines, the solid pink lines are existing sidewalks. The dotted pink lines are proposed sidewalks. It's very limited, but there's existing trails that come up around Waterview Avenue for the proposed park and the proposed trails. And there's quite a hierarchy of trails being proposed as a component of the waterfront park plan are dotted here in yellow. So I think the summary of that is it really lights up the the pedestrian connectivity and recreation assets of this area. One of the key initiatives of the master plan was views to the Patapsco River and the waterfront and the park from the existing neighborhoods in Cloman Street. So our proposal is able to keep those view windows open, and the orientation of the housing is set up in a way to be able to keep those view windows open without blocking any of the housing along that frontage. The little bubble here in the corner is just that difference between site plan A and site plan B that I was talking about between a few minutes ago. A couple park sections that show the design, and a couple illustrative sections that show the design. So we have a section here I've mentioned throughout the presentation, the complexity of the link between the existing Westport neighborhood and this proposal. So we have a section that illustrates that, and then a section that illustrates the park as proposed with the street in front of it in C, D, E, and F, and then in the mu loaded condition in C, D, E, and F. And then the relationship of the park to the townhouses that front the Patapsco River. I think it's important to note that that proposal is consistent throughout. We're not putting a public street between, or a street or vehicular access between the housing and the river. We want that kind of soft edge of architecture and housing against the park, not the hard edge of transportation. And that's fairly consistent throughout the proposal. So this is section A. I'll work it left to right. This is our proposed community. This is Cloman, 62-foot right of way, complete street with an 8-foot sidewalk, 8-foot landscape verge, 9-foot parking, 20-foot roadway, a landscape verge. This is the existing train track, some of the existing green space with a sidewalk proposed. This is the light rail overpass, and then this is the existing Westport neighborhood. So you can get kind of a sense of that complexity and that physical blocking that the overpass, the light rail overpass provides. This is a section through the park. So this is parcel B to the left and parcel C to the right. This is the condition where we have the road on both sides of the park. So this would have a right of way on both sides of the park. The alternative plan, our concept B, has a mu on the parcel C side of the park. And then this is the condition that we're proposing along the waterfront. So architecture along that edge with a public sidewalk, and then the public park proposed by field operations. So great relationship of architecture to the park and to water. These are some precedent images that have been provided by one of our potential end users. The architectural style, modern row homes, very high class architecture. This being proposed in this application, and I have some more detail images to show about the specific application, but we're going to just show these precedent images. Building massing and modeling. This is the existing site view to show the context. The orange buildings are 1- and 2-story buildings. So this is 295 off in your background. This is the MTA line, and this is the site. So generally what's around is 1- and 2-story buildings. There's a material storage lot here shaded in purple. The yellow highlighted area is the substation. so you can get a sense for what's around it. When we superimpose our proposal over top of that, you see that the proposals are generally 3- and 4-story buildings along, and then these are our view corridors that we have maintained that was exhibited in one of the prior parts of the presentation. So it fits in well with the surrounding community. It creates a great edge, and then obviously the amenity that the waterfront park is providing is key in connecting both the vehicular and the pedestrian access to the waterfront. Building design, as we're wrapping up here, these are a 2-over-2 stacked condominium unit that is part of the proposal that's being presented today. These are alley loaded front doors on the streetscape, 4 stories out of the ground. The alleys in the back have the core of the supportive utilities and the driveways and the garage door access. This is a 16-foot row home in an urban condition with the option to go to a 4th floor for kind of a sky view. Sky Lanai, I think, is the market name that the builder uses for it. Again, alley loaded architecture on the streetscape, cars and garages in the back. And then the final unit is a 24-foot row home, 3 stories with the option to go to a 4th story out of the ground, again, to utilize kind of those long, amazing views we have from this site. Streetscape in the front, and again, cars and garage doors in the back. With that said, I will conclude my part of the presentation and open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much. And thank you for honoring the time crunch on this. It worked out perfect. And
I was getting stressed out there a bit.
No, sorry about that. But no, it was great. It was perfect in terms of giving us the overview. I think the initial slides with the photos were also very helpful because it is a large site and it does have complexity and kind of the existing condition. And if there's anything left to discuss from clarity point of view, I'm sure the panelists will be asking you questions about that. So I want to kick off our Q&A. We first sort of ask questions for clarification, also to catch up on conversations that perhaps we weren't a part of, obviously, because we're seeing the project today fresh. So I have one. Yeah, this is a great slide to start with. I have one question, like very kind of high level. I'm looking from this bird's eye view, and really in particular with relationship to the previous approved master plan. I think there's a very drastic change to the master plan. I think we would all agree. Perhaps it's not drastic if you look at it from the point of view of like, well, we just took this portion of the master plan and multiplied it in the rest of the plan. So from that point of view, you've multiplied a certain condition and applied it through the entire site. But it is very fundamentally different in terms of density, in terms of amenity, in terms of relationship of public and private. So for all intents and purposes, and I'm going to put architecture aside for a moment. Thank you for sharing kind of the expression of the architecture. It's very helpful to get an idea of kind of what the vision is, but I even want to put the architectural style or typology of the units aside and really look at it just purely from a planning perspective. And when we're talking about compatibility and whether this program is compatible with the site, I'm not even getting into so much into the design of it. Like we can talk about, the driveways and the streets and like all that. But there seems to be a fundamental shift between understanding public and private in the previous planning scheme where, and I remember in conversations, probably documented in meeting minutes, is where the idea was that this whole northern half of the site, plan right here, was going to be a mixed use development that not only provides a lot of amenity, but also by virtue of typology, negotiates a public-private relationship with a public park that's very different than having somebody's front door right at the edge of it, right? There was this idea that, there's these layers between the public and the private as you're going into the development. In this configuration, we're having a direct switch. There was even a section that showed, here's the public park, here's the sidewalk, and here's somebody's front door, right? So there's no longer layers. There's no longer mixed use. There's no longer sort of like this relationship between the two. And I'm wondering, have you guys had conversations along those lines? Not just like what program makes sense right now financially and here's how we lay it out, but a little bit of a bigger picture of like what kind of community are we creating? What kind of experience is this? Are we creating sort of a community that appears to be privatizing the water, like just by virtue of that proximity and how tight it is? There's like that, is it an 8-foot sidewalk or something, 5, 8, 10? That is the entire space that's negotiating somebody's private front door and somebody's public experience, and then the water beyond. It's a very tenuous kind of place to be. So I want to hear from you guys. What kind of conversations have you had internally as a team in terms of that complete pivot in the plan? Again, not from a design perspective, but from a planning and from a kind of conceptual perspective. And even if you've had any conversations with planning staff or others, just to catch us up onto why do you think that this is a compatible solution? Because you did mention that we think this is compatible with the plan and the site and this and that. So we just want to understand how you're looking at it.
But I can start. This is Ryan Humphrey. As one of the people who helped put together this plan, I think one of the major inspirations was I spent 12 years living on the promenade over on the Canton side, and lived amongst some of the most successful neighborhoods that Baltimore has. And I think that the area specifically where I lived, right where Boston Street meets Alisana, is actually a more extreme example of what you're describing. You have townhouses that literally abut right onto the promenade. And I don't think we see the fear that you're talking about people feeling like it's privatized. The promenade is one of the most active parts of the city. It's active pretty much through the night, as I can attest at 4 a.m, seeing people going out for a jog still. It's a very active area that people like hanging out on their back porches and interacting with people as they pass by on the promenade. It's a very neighborly, community feel to it. And in terms of the width, our jogging trails are 14 feet wide. They're set off from the houses. In the Muse, there's also separate bike trails. And, in terms of average width, we have quite a fair distance between the trails and the houses themselves. But then I guess to speak to your second point, when we were devising the original master plan, one of the major concerns that we heard was echoed by you there, which is the existing Westport community on the west side of the light rail tracks wanted to feel that they would be welcome in the park. And they were concerned because obviously the zoning code doesn't require a large centralized park. It simply requires an access to the water between 50 and 100 feet, right? It could be done through an easement along in a trail along the water. What we've tried to provide is a large 2-acre space in the center of the park, right by the Wenburn access point, that will feel like a public park that's available to everybody and will not feel privatized, I think is the guiding principle that field operations used when they started designing the park itself.
Thank you. It's helpful to understand how you're looking at it, indeed, using examples from Baltimore's promenade and waterfront. I think it's the analysis where things might differ, and I think we can address that in the comment section, but it's very helpful to understand kind of where do you want it to be, and then we can evaluate and see how do we get there, right? So thank you so much, Ryan, for that clarification. I'd like to open it up to the rest of the panel for any questions, clarifying questions you have. What are your questions for the team?
Just a couple. I'm trying to understand. I think I kind of gather what you're holding on from the previous plan and what the general changes are. But if you can just remind me again, if you can zoom into the docking area a little bit. I'm trying to understand, when you say docking area, is that an area someone can pull up a boat, they can launch a boat, or is it just like a pier that reaches into the water for pedestrians only?
I think that the particulars of how that works with the park would be better addressed by field operations when they review their park concept later today.
Yeah, Zach, can you go to the original master plan?
Yeah.
So that plan had provided a potential kind of docking area there. I think that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Born, and so that was part of the original proposal. I think when the kind of park and design of parcels C through F for Westport, for this Westport neighborhood, were kind of reimagined to the single family residential extension of the Baltimore City street grid, that the dock wasn't as compatible with that promenade feature of a trail that allows access all the way through the middle branch of the Patapsco River. And that dock kind of separated that out. And so, yeah, again, that'd be a great question for the field operations team as well. But here, in this example, with the townhomes, it provides a lot of access through the parcel C through F neighborhood at many different points from Cloman Street, the existing neighborhood, and the light rail station, but isn't necessarily fully compatible with a dock, boat dock of that type of thing. But there would be opportunities in other parts of the park for someone to bring a kayak or something like that.
The development team also coordinated with the Baltimore Rowing Club, and there was a lot of concern on their part of any sort of extension into the water interfering with their particular course that they use for their races.
Got it. And then my second question, specific to from what I can see here on this plan, it looks as though they're generally maybe 2 or 3 building typologies, right? But I'm just going to focus on the fact that it looks as though there are 2 building sizes: a smaller, more discrete type building size along Cloman, and then a larger footprint kind of scattered around, and then maybe a third that kind of fronts onto the water. So can you just very briefly and quickly give me an idea of what's the difference between those 2 or 3?
Yeah, the parcel B, which is already under construction, has a mixture of 16 and 20-foot wide townhouse units. Parcel C through F is a mixture between 16-foot units, 24-foot units, and then stackable condo units, which also have a 24-foot wide footprint, but have 2 floors of one unit followed by 2 floors of another unit. And then the last product type is obviously the apartments over on parcel A.
Got it. And the 16 footers that front onto Cloman, are those 2 stories or 3s?
They are 3.
3.
So roughly everything is a 3-story. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Well, there's 4-story units in the center of C through F.
Got it. All right. I think I'll pause there with my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Osborne. Kevin, do you have any questions for the project team?
Yeah, so one is more of like a clarification. So sorry if I didn't follow through everything about the grades here, but it seems like, with the Clare and Wenburn crossing, that because light rail ends up going on grade on Plan West, or I guess south of the light rail station, that there's no way for any kind of future connectivity across the tracks west of that, or sorry, south of that. Is that correct? There's no way that, like, beyond south of Wenburn, there's no opportunity in the future for any additional connection. Is that correct?
Yeah, from Wenburn Street to Waterview Avenue, that's correct. It goes from, it is elevated at Wenburn, but then south of the light rail station, it is going from an elevated situation to an at-grade crossing at Waterview. And so in between those, there's, on the existing neighborhood side, private property, kind of as you can see in this area, and no real street grid that connects through. So that condition going from elevated about 18 feet down to at grade, you would have conflicts with any pedestrian or vehicular crossings.
I noticed that you aligned your like your east-west street kind of like with the one that's sort of on the other side across the tracks. I didn't know if that was maybe an intent to at some point try to connect across there too, or is that not?
Wenburn Street does have an existing connection underneath the light rail, and so that would be continued in this proposal as well. Wenburn
I guess
Street.
what I'm asking though is that does that opportunity exist on any of the other east-west streets, like your next east-west street, which does align with the existing neighborhoods, east-west street, like further south, like that? Is that a possible future connection? No, then farther west. Sorry,
No.
farther south. Farther south.
It's not.
Yeah. Existing, based on the existing infrastructure, there is no ability to connect those streets.
Farther south, like just if you keep going south, like that other street. Yeah, that one right there where your cursor is. There's no potential there for any kind of future crossing, either pedestrian or otherwise.
So for that, I believe there's private property there, and I think that's where it's transitioning to a at-grade crossing. And so there would be difficulty with connecting that street down to the proposed development street, but we wanted to continue that street grid from a potential view point, as well as just kind of continuing that, from a subdivision standpoint to keep that street grid. But it would be, I believe it's tough there to provide any sort of vehicular or pedestrian access from the existing neighborhood.
And then I guess to follow up on that, like, can you just trace like the path that someone would take getting off the light rail to get to the parcel? Is because you said that it's an 18-foot above grade platform. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yes. So we're improving the what would be the east side of that platform with making it ADA compliant down to a walking trail, which will follow the previous road bed of Cloman Street. And then we would cross down it where Wenburn crosses the CSX tracks.
Okay, that's interesting. All right. And then, but did you look at all about having also maybe just like a crossover at the 18-foot height that landed farther south at all as a possibility?
It was explored by Pat Turner, and I believe it was ridiculously cost prohibitive.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because you guys said, it's in your presentation, you used the word isolated like probably a dozen times, and I just was wondering how deep and aggressive the team went throughout this thing, how to mitigate that isolation beyond the Clare and Wenburn connection. It's really a challenge, obviously. Yeah.
I was just going to say CSX is a large impediment. So it's uninterrupted track from Waterview to Wenburn. And so and they're not going to cooperate with a pedestrian crossing. So anything would have to be either a tunnel or a bridge.
So I guess, my question is like, what did you explore any tunnels or bridges in addition to the at-grade crossings? And it sounds like you did, and that it was maybe cost prohibitive. And then another connectivity question, where Cloman and the extension of Cloman ending at the south end, was there any thinking about, and I don't know if it's even possible, but could that possibly connect into that industrial site? Because one could imagine in the very long-term future, that industrial site south of your parcels, if it was ever redeveloped as a neighborhood, it would connect to an additional, the residential neighbors which are farther around. Is that something that's possible in your plan, or are there grade conditions of the roadways prohibiting that?
You're saying at the connection right here, that's kind of in the central of the screen where Cloman Street connects into Waterview Avenue?
Yeah, like, is there a potential future, are you allowing for any kind of potential future connections across there? Should that area be developed in the future as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's prohibited to provide continued vehicular and pedestrian access across Waterview, continuing to the south, which is kind of along the light rail. There's obviously that existing road, south on plan south on the screen that connects into Waterview as well at that three-way light. And so, it would be possible, if that was explored in the future on those other developments.
Yeah, it just seems like trying to anticipate any future like things that might seem out of the realm of possibility right now that as things change, as we know, like the idea of building in that flexibility for more connections to kind of mitigate this kind of cul-de-sac feeling that is obviously a challenge you're up against here. This seems like an interesting thing to like future-proof a little bit. And then I guess while we're on the slide, can you describe a little bit the nature of that commercial parcel there, like what's happening there, like what kind of uses and why the sort of the type of building behind the parking lot was kind of chosen as the typology.
Brian, is that one that you want to take?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, we've been working closely with the Community Development Agency for the existing Westport community. And as a byproduct of the switch in product type, moving the retail over to a portion of parcel A to the south. This particular building I would consider a placeholder, but we basically gave them the footprint and product type that the existing community was asking for that site. We're in the process now of negotiating with them to try and get a contract on that, and they'll have to follow up with you with more specifics on that building. The building just north of it is the apartments, as we mentioned, and you'll be getting that in a presentation later today.
Thanks. That's all I have. Actually, like one really quick last question: how many times a day and how long does the CSX train cross through the site?
That is a very good question. I've asked CSX, and they don't necessarily pin down a schedule or a time, but my understanding anecdotally is that it happens a couple times a day.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Kevin. Sharon, what are your questions for the team? And after you address your questions, please offer your comments, and then we'll work back into the rest of the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Just have a couple questions. Just diving into these townhouse groupings, can you talk me through a little bit about what's happening inside there? I want to go a little deeper. For example, what are the building frontage depths? I see that there's parking, there's alleyways for access to the garages, and it looks like there's parking on the front sides. Can you talk me through the green frontages, street tree treatments, things like that? Just what's happening what's happening when you're in those neighborhoods?
Sure. So the way it's set up is there's this is a public street. So parallel parking in the frontage with the tree landscape verge, and then a proposed sidewalk. And then Bob, what's your setback from the right of way to the front of the unit in this application?
It's around 5 feet.
Yeah, so roughly 5 feet of green space in the front of the units. These are the stacked townhouses that were in the center of this land bay. So you're going to have two front doors. Builders do that differently. Some of them come into a vestibule, and there's two doors within the vestibule. Some of them separate the doors, and then you're going to have the architecture there. So pretty urban feel of the architecture along that frontage. In the alley side of the units, in most of the application, we're providing for a parking spot in. It's not on lot because these are condominium units, but in the townhouses, a spot behind it before the garage. But the height of the unit varies based on the unit type, but generally 3 or 4 floors above grade in both of those locations. So alleys, pretty tight to the street frontage in the back. Most of the utility uses, I know BG&E does things a little differently. Most of the utility service uses related to vehicular service and utility service, trash collection, that sort of thing in the back. Does that answer your question?
It does. Can you scroll up so I can see the alley condition closer to the water, so that we're looking to the east? Okay. All right. Just understanding what the character of those spaces are. Um, and then while we're in here at this scale, could you talk us through the initial thinking on stormwater management? These communities are located right on the water. What about storm surge? What about stormwater management? How is that being thought through at this time?
Right. So typically, on a residential townhouse development like this, it is pretty typical to have microbiome retentions throughout the site to treat various areas that drain into the various outfall points, to treat any potential stormwater runoff from the site, and then that would outfall into the middle branch of the Tapsco River, to make sure that we're meeting the Maryland requirements, and those are pretty well integrated in with the project. Typically, they're well planted, and they would provide kind of that that extra greenery around the site, and that's where most of the townhomes would drain. We are up against the middle branch of the Patapsco River, as discussed. From a quantity control standpoint, we are the goal is always to match our post-development runoff flows to the middle branch to avoid any increase in flows. In this case, that we would be working with DPW on potential strategies to do so. Us being right up against the water, though, that is not a full requirement to match quantity control. Match your pre-development stormwater runoff with your post-development stormwater runoff. That will be an ongoing conversation with DPW regarding that piece. And then otherwise, part of this project is within the critical area of the Chesapeake Bay. And so there are additional nutrient load removal requirements for phosphorus and nitrogen that we would work with the State Critical Area Commission to make sure that this project was adequately mitigating any potential nutrient additives into the middle branch of the Patapsco River, so that it wasn't causing any increases in those as well.
And then to answer your last question regarding storm surge, we do have a conditional letter of map revision from FEMA to bring the entirety of C through F out of the floodplain. And then lastly, it's not a part of this presentation. I believe you'll be seeing some of it in the park presentation later today, but as you can see, just to the east of parcel B, we have entered into an agreement with a group called Greenvest to do artificial wetlands. Here, can you scroll to the south, please? South? South? Yeah, a little further. There. To do artificial wetlands at the terminus of that cove has two outfalls that basically dumps all of the stormwater for thousands of units that don't currently have stormwater management treatment. So we've entered into an agreement with Greenvest to try and create artificial wetlands to help keep the middle branch a little bit cleaner.
Okay, thank you. And as these compliance measures develop, we'll want to see evidence of that. We'll want to see how you're doing that, how you're acting as stewards of the watershed there, and how you're meeting these requirements. And then back to the microbiomes, I'm aware that that's how one would typically manage stormwater in these neighborhoods. What I'm not seeing is space for that. Microbiomes take room, and so it's obvious that there's not room for slope sides. So we'll want to see, again, as these details emerge, as you develop this, should it develop along these exact lines? Are there walled bios? How are you managing that specifically, and what does that do to the character of the neighborhoods? So I'll go right into comments there. I share Paulina's concern about the feeling of the privatization of the water's edge there. These neighborhoods feel like private places. Not only in the macro sense of these blocks of homes feeling like a little bit of a wall against the water with very few actual feelings of porosity through them, but green, sort of green porosities, and not just narrow streets, but also at a granular level, even if you're walking through this neighborhood, and that was the reason for my question, of these narrow slots of individually owned parcels where there doesn't even appear to be openings of green space or pocket parks or places for that stormwater, those stormwater management facilities that feel like gardens to happen. So even when you're walking through there, it doesn't, it feels like a series of privately owned spaces as opposed to having those moments of neighborhood park kind of moments, even within this. So it does feel sort of very taken over by a series of private spaces in these blocks. Whereas earlier iterations had more frequent moments of public spaces and more green interruptions along the water. So the water edge had a character and a reality of public access to the park, to the water, sorry. And similarly, it does feel very, very close to the water. It is very, very close to the water. 55 feet is not a generous corridor. And I understand the analogy that was given about the promenade, but this isn't an inner city context. And I feel like in the greener context of this edge, especially with the park system and the circulation system that field operations is developing, it has a very ecological character to it. And these blocks of townhomes that come so very close to the water interrupt that character in a way that feels intrusive in the context of the park system that is being developed. So that is concerning, that proximity to the water and the encroachment onto that green corridor along your eastern edge is concerning. It does, there is a rationale, and I see that what you're doing with the continuing the housing typology from the west across the public transit and Cloman Street across to where parcel B is. So as you're driving through that neighborhood, contextually, it makes sense. And I understand you've been responsive to the neighbors there. You're continuing that residential neighborhood across eastward to the water. And there's a rationale that seems very sound there, as problematic as it feels to go that far to the water. What is less logical, and what there doesn't seem to be as cohesive a rationale for, is north of there, parcel C through F, where it simply continues it northward without a real rationale in terms of housing topology or variety of density or typology or green space allotment, and some of the things I was mentioning earlier about access to public areas in that area. So again, where parcel B has a logic in terms of its housing topology, I see that less so north of there. I believe those are my comments for now. So I'd like to hear my colleagues, and I might have something more later. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. I'll circle around. It does help sometimes to look at it a little longer, listen to other things come about. So I'll check back in a bit. Thank you. Kevin, what are your comments for the team?
Thanks. Actually, I have kind of a lot, and I know we're kind of like a little bit pushed on time, so apologies in advance if they seem maybe a little scattered, but I was going to go through the notes that I was just taking to myself. I think I already kind of touched on this building in and future proofing with connectivity options, even if they seem a little far fetched, like just allowing that to happen. I think it's always a good idea. And I do want to say, like, I'm maybe not always in the majority on this, but like I really appreciate the simplicity of like the row house grid, the kind of the repetition, and I think it's like a really smart choice. I mean, I think we all know that like it's played out in like amazing neighborhoods across the country, that this kind of grid allows this relatively simple, but allows for this kind of richness to happen within it. But I think if you're going to take that approach, you have to kind of allow that richness to kind of seep in a few unexpected ways. I mean, I guess a couple of things that came to my mind is like, is there room somewhere for like a little corner store? Are there room for kind of unexpected spaces that are maybe a little bit different than like the, this sort of the more monotonous kind of every time you reach the every time you reach the edge, it's the sort of the same sized little open space. And so I think that like, what I really appreciate the simplicity of the grid. I think that maybe there's a little bit of room for building in a little bit of that, more of the unexpected. I mean, for example, another example would be like, when on the alley and short edge of blocks, sometimes like they, you turn and sometimes you don't. And I think when the alley entry seems too wide and it's not kind of, lined with maybe a garden wall, I think thinking about those entrances into the alley zones is really a really important design thing. I hope that comes later, with more design development, but just sort of maybe a prompt to kind of think about that really carefully and use that as an opportunity as you move forward. I think having said all that, like I do feel like that somehow the waterfront edge, just kind of building upon the previous points that have been made, it does feel really tight. And I'm not a proponent of just saying, oh, it doesn't feel right, like move it back because we want more space. But I think that for all the reasons that Sharon articulated, like when you actually need that space for not just for a performative landscape to perform as it should, and also like the need for feeling like public. I really share Paulina's concern about this. Some of those areas feeling like the proximity is just too close. I think it could completely work, but it's all about the nuance of the dimension. I mean, I'm thinking about even, I guess a really well-known example that maybe a lot of you know is just like Brooklyn Heights Promenade, right? Where it's like a pretty tight promenade, but then there's a significant buffer of sort of, it's even private, but private yards between the residential, and there's no road in between it. But even that requires like a pretty significant distance, so you don't feel like you're kind of on top of people. And then if you're forced up against a much tighter configuration, then the ground floor of that first level of living space is critical to get right. Because if you're walking 8 feet away and you're looking directly into like a living room, that's going to not only feel like an invasion of privacy for people living there, but it's also going to make the public space for visitors feel like it's not open or welcome for everyone. It's going to feel like they're invading on private territory. So how those step up 3 or 4 feet, with using the grades. So obviously you can enter a grade in the back, but maybe there's a drop in the front to help kind of separate that, not just horizontally, but vertically, I think is an important consideration. Because for me right now, you're kind of ending up with a waterfront park edge that is neither this kind of soft ecological sort of bucolic transition, and it's not the kind of intense, tight, compact, vibrant urban waterfront like you get like the wharf or the inner harbor. It's like in between. It's like neither one nor the other. So I think that's all an issue, not of like the planning intent of the ideas, but just like a thing of dimensions and doing sort of more zoomed in sections and really understanding like what that relationship is like. And to whoever was speaking on the team side about that other example in Baltimore that you're like, I'm just very curious how like the dimensions compare to these dimensions, right? I think just it's really worth testing that at a very specific level. Jumping over to parcel A, like this sort of commercial and the apartment complex, it almost looks like looks like a different kind of urbanism. Like you're alluding to like the row house blocks and the sort of traditional walkable urbanism. It's almost like kind of gave up here, and especially with the apartments. I'm kind of curious about why there's no east-west connections, kind of weaving it into the neighborhood, at least pedestrian connection or trail connections across, maybe one roadway connection. And then maybe almost inverting the block where you're sort of having the frontage not be, where you're parking with a great view into this finger park, but you're actually having apartments lining that. Again, I don't know much about the typology or what that's going to look like. It just seems like it's sort of a more suburban, counterintuitive, sort of not traditional urbanism here that you're kind of using as the foundation for all the other parcels. So that's a little bit of a contradiction in my mind. I think some of the street trees on parcel C to F look a little anemic, and I'm not sure why they're kind of the east-west ones aren't looking like, with this amount of pavement and alleys and things, I think you really have to go hard with the street trees. And that for some reason on parcel B, they look a little bit more robust. And I don't know why if there's something happening on parcel C to F where they're not, but just kind of a minor point. All right, I think I'll stop there. That's yeah, I might have some more comments as we go along, but I think I'm pushed on time here. So, Paulina.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, please take note of anything else that comes to mind. I'll come back to you in a minute. Osborne, what are your comments for the team?
Just a few. So let me first say that I think, the team, you've inherited this site and you're moving forward, and that's a wonderful thing. But I also think that, there's a very strong and robust framework that to some extent the previous team kind of put in place, particularly along the water's edge, balancing a lot of that organic element with the potential for redevelopment or the potential for development. And I do acknowledge that you're kind of wedged in here. You've got a lot of challenges, certainly everything that's occurring along Coleman. But as I kind of look at this, I get the feeling that in some ways the project has kind of taken a different direction to the extent where I can argue it almost like took a step backwards, right? And, if I were to characterize it, just looking at it, looking at the site plan, there's a kind of sameness, a kind of relentlessness about the approach that's taken. And I'll kind of explain that in a minute. Um, and I don't know if it is the decisions that were made, particularly so that the project can move forward. Every project has a kind of an economic threshold, and I get that, and I truly understand that. I appreciate the concerns and the challenges associated with that. But I also think that sometimes you have to push the envelope as a design team to really begin to explore and investigate, where can we not just do what's typical, but maybe we can create some atypical conditions that will now introduce the opportunities for variety. Because with variety comes the ability to create interest and really have your project excel. And I think one of the first pieces that you're hearing so far from uh, the rest of the panelists is the reaction to the water's edge. In some cases, it appears privatized. Privatized can be good, but in some cases, it can be bad, depending on the context and depending on the approach taken. So I think in this case here, it does appear to be somewhat exclusive, mainly because a lot of the buildings are so close to the water's edge. And in contrast to the Canton area, because one of those folks who walked through that area quite a bit, and I do agree with you that it's wonderful to have an afternoon stroll and stand there and have a conversation with a resident, and maybe in a week later they'll look for you, right? So there's a certain kind of intimacy associated with that. But I think that waterfront is different to this waterfront. And Sharon clearly articulated it in the sense that here there's more of an ecological perspective, an ecological balance. So the way you interact and move through that space should be different. So I think, yes, perhaps some of the buildings can be a little bit closer to the water, but I don't think all of the buildings need to be so close to the water's edge. There's a kind of a compression that's occurring here, which is counterintuitive to what's literally happening further to the south, in that ecological zone that's being developed there. So I think that's one thing the team really needs to go back and take a look at. One of the ways to do that is to take a look at the building typologies again. It seems as though you've settled on maybe two or three, but even within those two or three, I'm not necessarily seeing opportunities, or you've not sort of presented any opportunities where they can be modulated based on the unique site conditions within parcels parcels B, C, and F. Kind of like a hint of what Kevin was alluding to a few minutes ago. And I'll give you an example. For instance, the 16 footers, all of the 16 footers, it seems to me, they're clustered along Cloman Street. But what's the rationale for that? I don't get it. I don't understand why everything is 16 feet, has to be along Cloman Street, other than, well, maybe you're just stacking these things so you can fit as many in as possible. So I think there has to be the ability to modulate that, kind of think of these parcels a little bit more independently, and take those typologies and kind of arrange them, cluster them together in a little bit more uh, meaningful way, as opposed to just saying, well, all the 16 footers are here, 24 footers are there, and so forth and so forth. So I think that's one area that you'll need to revisit as well, the typologies. And then Cloman Street. So I've heard you say that there really aren't any opportunities to implement a complete street strategy here. And that may be so based on the width of Cloman Street, but more so based on the transportation elements that move through here, one of which is CSX. And yes, I share your concerns, and I do understand whether you did study a bridge or a tunnel, either you will meet a significant amount of resistance from CSX. I acknowledge that. And it will be extremely costly, because if you were to do a bridge, the bridge would need to be so high above grade that it's almost prohibitive. So I acknowledge that. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we just fold and kind of go away and stay away from CSX. The problem is you're introducing a significant amount of residents here. And I commend you on the fact that the majority of it will be ownership, which, is a great thing, particularly for this area. But you got to think of what that means. So you've got a community just to the west on the hill. You also indicated that much of the commercial probably will be, you want to be compatible with the Annapolis corridor in terms of commercial. Uh, and you've got the light rail stop there. So you can imagine there's a significant amount of pedestrian movement, certainly, that will need to traverse Cloman and get across the rail tracks, whether it's CSX or the light rail. Light rail is a little bit easier because it's grade separated and you can kind of move through there. But what I'm getting at is it seems to me that Cloman really needs a lot more attention from a master plan standpoint, in the sense that all of the smaller units that are fronting onto Cloman, think about what that begins to look like. Even though they're in clusters, it doesn't matter how much you begin to uh, uh, camouflage the architecture. The massing is still what it is. They're 16 footers. And, it just seems really just relentless. And how does that relate to let's say, the pedestrian experience for someone walking along Cloman trying to get to, let's say, Wenburn to cross over, either to go into the community further up west on the hill, or to access the light rail, or to even walk all the way up to Annapolis Road to go to, let's say, a local restaurant or some kind of a commercial establishment. It's just very mind-boggling. So I think somehow there has to be more sections studied along various points on Cloman to kind of really understand what that experience is like. The trains, CSX trains are not going through there with the frequency that light rail is. They're probably going through there at best maybe once or twice a day, of which one of those movements is probably off hours. So I think you have opportunities to push the envelope here and really begin to integrate that streetscape with the challenges of having the rail crossing go through. Also, you've got the substation across the way from you, and you've got these houses kind of looking at that. What does that mean? The only thing I see as a consistent treatment that's kind of being applied here along Cloman is you've got these parallel, well, not parallel, you've got parking consistent along that edge, but it all looks the same. There's no real differentiation, when you get to Clare when compared to Wenbon, which brings me to the third point, which are the key nodes and the key points of access. So Wenburn and Clare, you've identified as your key points. And I think that's consistent, mainly because that's probably the only locations you can really get through and get in. But as you get into your site, what happens? Nothing. you know, you just pick it up with a roadway that continues on and kind of disappears into the site. There's no acknowledgement at all that these are primary nodes, key points at which you access your site. It seems to me that you would want to really celebrate that. You would want to really treat those areas somewhat differently, not just for the pedestrian, but it's also the vehicles, how they get in and out and move through those spaces. You think of what's happening at Claire, and I think the tracks are at grade. So it just seems to me that node, that intersection needs to really be different in terms of how it's studied, because if trains are going through there and you're traveling down Cloman, what happens? All of the cars that literally are turning and waiting to go across Claire, they will create a bottleneck. They'll block up that entire area to the extent that if you're coming out of your development, you're going to have a significant bottleneck. So I'm not seeing anything in the master plan at the moment that begins to address these very challenging concerns or challenging issues. And I would love to see how the team begins to prepare for those sort of uneventful type of situations. And I think in general, that's kind of my commentary. I would hope that you would go back and revisit some of these building typologies and how you place them on the site, particularly parcels C and F, how you kind of arrange them on the site. I would love to see an attitude towards, you know, changing that a little bit so there's a little bit more variety and interest in terms of how those communities are set out. And one final point, I hear what you're saying in terms of you don't want to step on the toes or undermine the move to make Annapolis kind of like this more commercial corridor. I think the amount of units that you've got here, it really warrants some measure of commercial to the northern portion of this parcel, as suggested in the previous plan. You got to make that work, and for a number of reasons, you know. And I always joke and I kid around and I say, look, you know, it's a Sunday morning, you know, I need a gallon of milk. What am I going to do? Get in my car and drive all the way up to Annapolis Road? That's very inconvenient. So please just consider a little bit more commercial to the north, which would somewhat balance what's being proposed, I guess, in parcel A. And Pavlina, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Osborne. In interest of time, I will sort of group my comments into 4 buckets. The first one starting from a very high level conversation here. And it has to do with, you said multiple times in your presentation, this site couldn't be any better located. Anyone would agree. You're close to, in fact, adjacent to public transportation, very quick connection to the highway systems, so that, regionally, premium water views, very close to downtown. Just by enumerating all of these things, this site has the ingredients to actually be a rich, renewed development for the kind of a planning best practices sort of standards would demand, whether it's more of a TOD kind of density, whether it's more of a kind of waterfront kind of richness and mixed use. There's millions of examples, globally of how one could approach this. I think that with this particular plan, and to agree with Osborne, this is taking a step back, because instead of building into richness, versatility, really responding to the assets of the site and designing for those, it's really moving in the other direction. What is the most kind of, instead of mixed use, like mono use, site use for the site we can come up with? It's some form of attached dwelling unit multiplied throughout the entire site. I can't in fact think of anything that would be more kind of uniform, unrich, unmixed than this particular solution. I think in the previous master plan, we were talking about, yes, for example, that parcel B area could be a little bit quieter along the water, and it can really take on to this kind of more single family or stacked unit kind of approach, only because the north side is the one that was really providing density, that was really bringing people to this area. All of that richness, all of that conversation about really the best and highest use of the site is gone. Like, we're now down to just multiplying things with very little variability through the entire site. And I have to say, this isn't necessarily a criticism to the team per se. I think the plan is competent. Like you've heard so far, it's like it's clean, it's simple, it's nice, and all of that. But I want to put this in perspective. Westport has been waiting for a development for such a long time, and it is such a prime location. And now that we're here, is this really the best use for this? Is this really the best it can be? I think we need to really, put our expectations a little bit higher. And I realize, of course, all of the limitations, financial and otherwise, but there's even marginal improvements to this site, even from just a programming and planning perspective, that really need to be done now. We can't accept that simply multiplying attached dwelling units is the best solution for this, because it's not. There's just so many other examples of how to do this better. So I think there's this really big conversation that needs to happen on that level. Is this the best approach for a site with these kinds of qualities, location, connectivity, views, all of that? The second part that I want to talk about, and mostly to qualify my previous kind of statement about the privatization of the water, because it sounds harsh, right? And it's like people can interpret it in so many different ways, and I'm sure it's going to find its way out there, or this is what was said. But this is why I said it, and why it's striking me that there's a conflict there, even beyond just the design nuances that maybe we won't have time to get to today exactly, but we will next time, is because there's the public portion, right? The waterfront, the park, the this, the that is the city's investment into the waterfront, right? This is something the city is saying, we're going to develop this into this ecological, beautiful public amenity for the citizens of Baltimore to use, and for any visitor that is coming here, right? And this is what we're giving the rest of this development as an asset, right? This is the public contribution to this experience here. On the private side, it seems like it's saying, thank you very much. Here's some attached dwelling units, right? So it appears as though the development is benefiting from this beautiful new waterfront development that is happening, this public investment that is happening on the waterfront, but it isn't really giving much back, right? So the owners of these dwelling units or the renters are going to be directly benefiting from that, but the visitors won't, right? The rest of the kind of ability to really enjoy this one. There's very limited public parking. I'm looking at the plan, and I imagine that some of the parking spaces that are on those parcels will be taken by residents' second cars, especially on the 16-footers and stuff like that. So I already see that tension of like, oh, these visitors are parking in front of my house, in front of the streets. Not everyone is very comfortable with that. And so there is that tension now of like, these are our houses, right? And we have great views, right? And there's this public space there that people are coming and trying to enjoy, but there's this tension between who is this for, and the fact that, even if you come to spend the day here, there really isn't any kind of a commercial support, any sort of respite, a place to get coffee or to really feel like you're not in front of somebody's house. And that's probably one of the big differences between the promenade and the very mixed-use neighborhood that you gave an example with along the water in the historic parts of Baltimore, is that people are there not just so they can mill in front of somebody else's house. That's just a fraction and a portion of the experience. And I could argue actually the less comfortable one, because I also pushed strollers and walked dogs there for 10 years. And I have to say the areas where somebody's door was like right up on the promenade was the least enjoyable and the least comfortable one from the entire experience, particularly because of that tension. And so it's important to consider that relationship, the public and the private. If this development is benefiting from not only the waterfront site, the location of the site, but also this investment in the improved quality of the waterfront, then what is the private developer doing on its side to really support that? And not by any way of like, you owe me or anything like that, but really just to appreciate that it's a symbiotic relationship, right? If, for example, the waterfront in Fells Point and Canton didn't have like the marina and all of these different things working with it, then it wouldn't have been nearly as desirable. And vice versa, if there weren't mixed use kind of components and amenities and services just one block into the waterfront, then it wouldn't have been as desirable a place to go and really hang out. So I think we need to appreciate on that level that this has to be kind of a give and take relationship, and really understand what are the needs of the public space in order for it to really function and be rich and vibrant as everyone wants it to, that the private development can support, and vice versa. You know, what are the kind of experiences we're providing on the waterfront that enhances the private development? So that's really important conversation to have, which will affect what happens on the site and how it happens. To that end, I want to say that that coordination and this understanding, and kind of you talked about the seamless relationship with the waterfront design. I think Osborne asked you, like, or was it Kevin, like, what is the relationship, or maybe even Sharon, earlier in the presentation, what is the relationship of this portion of the waterfront to, like, let's say these houses? And you're like, well, I don't know, ask field operations later about their plan. That's not good enough. That's not how this should go. I think if the whole waterfront development was already done, the public portion, right? You would have been asked to take that as an existing condition and really actually tell us how your plan is relating to all of these different parts on the waterfront. The fact that this is even now in development is even more of a reason to talk to them with direct specificity, to the extent to which the two plans can synchronize and align even better. If it was already done, you would have simply had to react to things that are there, but now everything is a lot more malleable. The fact that there is no conversation or even, like, I don't know, talk to them about what's over there means that there is no seamless integration of this, that it is really like, here's the edge of the promenade and here's our houses. That is not how a very rich, vibrant waterfront experience that we've all enjoyed in the older parts of the city, or even enjoy in new parts of other cities, work, or how they are achieved. In fact, there needs to be a much higher level of understanding and communication and alignment with things. In fact, there's hierarchies within the waterfront that are not necessarily addressed beyond like the big park, right? And then there's houses for that too. There's hierarchies and nuances in the plan that are not coordinated with. And I think those are the little opportunities that you're missing to some of the other comments of, like, how do we bring variability and interest and uniqueness in the plan? This is how you don't force it, you don't fake it. You actually start to integrate with all of those things and create those nuanced conditions. So from that point of view, yeah, all the row houses are not going to be relating to the promenade and the jogging trail in the exact same way. And perhaps they will find and honor the places where perhaps there's a need for a greater layering of the public and private interaction in order for everybody to really have an equally enjoyable experience. And so all that is to say is that I think this is a great start in really trying to understand the change in your program when it comes to the master plan of the site. And I would consider it a very good yield study in terms of, like, how many more attached dwellings can we fit on this site. But I don't consider this necessarily really fully thought out in terms of a master plan. I think that there's a level of complexity and sophistication that needs to happen in these next studies, where in order for, to really understand and design for this waterfront strip where the private development, the public development meet, we need to have a much more in-depth study. If it's going to be Canton, if it's going to be Fells Point, or if it's going to be any other place, we're going to need to see case studies and examples, but not only of, like, look how nice it is and people are walking in front of it, but really to understand what makes the space successful and to relate it in a like-for-like matter. Because again, this is very isolated. It was said several times, right? It's not like Fells Point in Canton where you can arrive in any different direction on any different kind of point of it. There's kind of one way in and one way out for all intents and purposes. So there has to be comparison to like kind of conditions, and then analysis that actually identifies what are the elements that are making this successful, that simply have houses next to public health doesn't check the box and say this works. In the next, really need to see some of this more sophisticated analysis, more direct, more specific one. And we need to start to see where in the plan are some of those things beginning to address. The uniformity of it is not actually the strength of it. It's a good framework to start with, but it's really the appreciation of all of these different site conditions and opportunities to create variability within the plan is where the plan will really succeed. Let's see, lastly, I'm just realizing that within parcels C through F, now we have about 200, 300 dwelling units. And yes, this is bringing a lot of residents here, but I also have to be reminded that that kind of density can be fit on a quarter of the site, right? So I'm still having a hard time wrestling with the ability to perhaps support the site. I see that with this kind of density, you really can't have a meaningful commercial program on it. And it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? And the reluctance to put a more intense kind of commercial and mixed use program similar to what you had before is really for a long time in the future, keeping this site very isolated in the sense of being able to bring more people that can enjoy and live on it and you know, continue to evolve its economy. I want to ask the team to consider bringing back some kind of commercial program and perhaps a slightly different typology and mixed use and density on the very northern tip of the project. I'm looking at the block just on the very right-hand side, and even if it needs to cross over to the left of that driveway that comes now to the waterfront, I think they're considering that portion of the site with some of what a lot of the previous comments you got is probably one of the places where you can impact your plan the most. There's an opportunity to create a destination onto the site. There's an opportunity to bring a little bit more bodies in order to support even a basic commercial program that then the rest of the residents are going to benefit from. It can be as simple as like scrap the entire mixed use development from before and just, you know, fill it up with the same mono use things. I think there's some additional thinking that needs to happen here. And I appreciate that it will be also a matter of numbers and what the site can support. But I'm skeptical at this level that although you can build and sell and lease all of these sort of things, that without the commercial support, that this will actually be a successful and viable development adjacent to such an important public amenity. So there's a little bit of responsibility for the two to really work together for the long-term success of the project. That's the extent of my comments. I want to circle back to the rest of the panelists. Do any of you have any additional comments to offer to the team?
I don't, thank you.
I think you covered it really well. Yeah, I don't have anything else.
Osborne, nothing else. Great. Thank you all very much. We're a little bit over time, but we covered a lot of ground. Planning department, in your hands, any additional comments for the team?
Just that I'll circle back with the team. I know we have some work to do. I'm happy to meet with the team as soon as you're ready to get started on addressing the comments. And with that, we'll move on to our next presentation. I need to elevate a few folks.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
All right, so we're moving on to the Parcel A program, same area of the city. I've just elevated Jeff, and then Jeff, can you unmute?
Hi, everybody.
Okay, great. I'm elevating the design team now. Let's see, is Carla Ryan part of that? Maybe
She is
Sean.
not.
Okay. Can somebody from the design team take a look at the panelist and the attendees and tell me if I missed anybody?
Yeah. Architect, civil. I think we're good, right? We got our architect, got our civil engineer, we got our landscape, right?
Okay, great. Thanks for hanging in and for your patience. I like to remind everybody that while the Urban Design and Architecture Advisory Panel is a meeting open to the public, that it is a technical design review meeting. So while we don't accept public testimony the same way that we would in a public hearing, anybody in the audience who's interested or has concerns or questions, please feel free to drop me an email. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Another note, because this is a holiday, it's Rosh Hashanah, we are going to be recording and posting this to our YouTube channel. It's something that we try to avoid. Unfortunately, this time we missed it. We don't like to have presentations on religious holidays, so my apologies. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pavlina to introduce the panel, and then the project team can go ahead and introduce themselves and proceed with the presentation. Pavlina?
Thank you, Ren. Hello, everybody. Welcome to UDAAP. It is a Westport kind of day. We look forward to seeing your work. And I just want to introduce the panel very quickly. With me today are Kevin Storm and Osborne Anthony, architects and planners, and Sharon Bradley, landscape architect. In the interest of time, introduce you a team quickly, and then we look forward to seeing the development of your project. If you can keep the front end of the presentation a little shorter, we'll have time to go look at questions and discuss things more. That would be very helpful. Without any further ado, please take it away.
I guess that's my cue. So my name's Joe Waski. I'm with Soto Architecture. Fernando Bonilla is also with Soto. He's on the line as well. Jeff is with Site Insight. He's going to be our developer. And Sean is with Civil, as well with Bob Brooks. They're both working with kind of both on the civil and the landscape side of things. I think that's everybody. But I will be doing the presentation this morning, and understand that I will move speedily through so that we can get to the Q&A part. So give me 1 second as I share. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
It's not showing up to me.
Yes, it's still loading. It might take a second. There it is.
There it is.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so just want to give everyone kind of a boilerplate. So we are at still the planning stage. We are starting to think about the architecture of the buildings, but we really haven't developed the architecture because we wanted to get this meeting on the books so that we can fit in with the master plan the best that we possibly can. And then we'll be coming back to you guys in the future with kind of the architecture of the building, how that architecture responds to some of the moves that we're talking about here. So with that being said, just to kind of orient everyone, we're looking at this site right along here, the Parcel A site. Everyone's kind of talked about this, but it's near transit. It's kind of near the existing kind of downtown of Westport, and it's along the water. As we move into it a little bit more, you can start to see that it has a number of interesting relationships to the water, to the Main Street, to the new Cloman Street that's going to be developed as part of this, and also close to transit as well. And then I did want to just throw this slide up, this is the old, I think, kind of field operations master plan. So I just wanted to kind of place where our site was with kind of these number of programmatic elements that are going to be happening around us in the park. including a playground, a marina, some pavilions that are out along the dock, along the walkway. And so I just wanted to provide that. You can see below our site, there's kind of the existing master plan showed, which was kind of a combined, two buildings combined with a shared parking lot with the commercial parcel that's directly to the south. We've changed that a little bit, so we're just going to be moving into that design. And then I'm sure you guys spent kind of the majority of the morning on this, so there's nothing new here, but just wanted to kind of point out some of the things that have been discussed about this parcel. This is the parcel a little bit zoomed in, and this is kind of the current site conditions that are going on. Again, we know that Cloman Street's going to be getting kind of redeveloped and want to have more of a urban presence along Cloman Street, which you can see in the bottom left and the right. And then also, what's that relationship look like as you're passing through Waterview Avenue as well. So this is just kind of a, I guess, evolution of what we've looked at. In the top left was kind of our first pass where we really pushed the buildings as close to the waterfront as possible, so the water's to the south here, and put most of the parking towards the north. I think when we developed this plan, we didn't realize the extent of what Cloman Street was wanted to be, and then also some of the limitations that we had towards the rear of the site with kind of how steep the site dropped off. And so, we moved kind of down to the page to kind of a connected building presence where A and B, and just to give you kind of a overall view, A is a senior building and B is an affordable multifamily building. The senior building is also affordable. And so this is a twinning deal. And so one's a 4%, one's a 9%. And so that's why in that connected building with A and B, we're still kind of delineating one side is the 4%, one side is the 9%. So with that option kind of in the bottom left there, we decided, hey, this kind of creates too much of a barrier between the water and Cloman Street and kind of really the sea of parking around it. And so we started moving to kind of some on the right side here where it said, all right, let's have two buildings and create kind of a plaza in between the two buildings that can start to create that connection to the waterfront. And really the difference between the two on the right side here is where we have the curb cuts to Cloman Street. You can see in the top right, we kind of have the curb cuts on the ends there, and we avoid the center plaza having the curb cuts. So this creates, I think, more of a connection with the pedestrian of Cloman Street, because you're kind of saying, hey, cars go to the sides here. And we also looked at an option, which is in the bottom right, of having those curb cuts kind of closer to the plaza entry. And in this scenario, there's just kind of, we're hyper focusing where those, the in and out of the cars go. But we felt like this was a little bit too, pedestrians and vehicles are all kind of happening all at once. So we didn't necessarily like that option. Also, there's some issues with the fire truck kind of lengths for hoses and stuff like that. So that's why we went back to kind of the option that we have on the screen right now. So this is kind of a little bit zoomed out. You can see that future townhome development to the right. Again, that building A is the 90 unit senior building and the building B is the 50 unit multifamily building. We do have this critical buffer line, which you can see kind of in a dark gray to the south. That's a little bit to the north of the property line that we really need to keep the buildings kind of as close to that as possible. And then we also have this maglev easement we need to do on the front side. And so that's why these buildings are set back the way they are. I think that in kind of good urban design practice would be to get those buildings up as close to Cloman Street as possible. But because of this maglev easement, we needed to set the buildings back to where we needed to have them. So we tried our best to work with those kind of limitations to create really a really dynamic design that kind of bridges the gap between Cloman and the waterfront and also creates kind of a nice neighborhood for both of these buildings as well. Both of these buildings are 4 stories and are 4 stories of wood construction just based on the limitations that we have kind of from the financing side of things. And this is the unit mix. So we are currently looking again at kind of a mix in the blue building B of 1, 2, and 3 beds. So kind of having a mix of family style units. While the senior building is really only 1s and 2 beds, and that was based on kind of the market studies that we've had. We are providing 95 parking spaces on the site. We'll have 140 units, so it's not a 1-to-1. It's like I think it's 1 to 1.5, something like that. And that's also based on the studies that we've done on the market right now. And I'll just keep moving down. So we've looked at a lot of precedent for the architecture, really kind of using dynamic materials and really highlighting the corners is what we're looking at, as well as creating kind of almost a commercial presence at the bottom. Even though we're not providing any retail in our buildings, we want those amenity spaces to feel kind of tall, glassy spaces that really activate the streetscape, as well as the plazas that are there. And then also, we've been looking at the idea of kind of ground floor stoops for the ground floor units to again create kind of an active plaza situation. So we've been looking kind of the architectural precedent you're looking at here, as well as what do those plazas look like, right? We want to create these dynamic landscaped spaces, have these stoops kind of connect to those, and really draw people from their homes towards the waterfront park and really use the kind of the framing of the views towards the waterfront as our main design feature for the site. And so these are kind of some of the precedent images we were looking at for that. So this is kind of a zoomed in version of the plan. You can see kind of in the up towards the north of the page, we are talking of having kind of an entry plaza where it's curbless with bollards, so it kind of invites the pedestrians in, and the cars would kind of ramp up, that 6 inches to that level and then come back down to kind of the curbed areas where the parking spaces are. So that really creates kind of this entrance piece that brings you to building A and B from Cloman. And then we have our amenity spaces directly on that corner there. So that really, again, we're talking about tall, glassy spaces that really invite those to come and visit the building. And then that plaza right down the middle of the between A and B, we worked with the landscape architecture team on creating kind of a meandering plaza, so something that's not that's going to feel a little bit more homey and neighborhoody, where you don't really emphasize the length of building A and B, but it's kind of this pathway that kind of moves around with these spaces that really highlight in the center. We are showing a playground kind of right in the middle of the two buildings. And then as you get towards the bottom of the where A and B is, we have another amenity space that really focuses on the view towards the water, with a space in between that's kind of like a pavilion-y, really the end of the node of the plaza that you can have kind of as a place where it's shared waterfront viewing for both of these buildings. And you can also see kind of directly to the left of there, I don't know if you can see my mouse, that's where we're showing the connection to the future waterfront park. So we're really trying to create, I think I heard in your guys' last presentation, a transition from kind of a more private, living space, shared courtyard to this kind of public waterfront. We really want to create some moments there to create that transition. In building A, we are showing a courtyard for the seniors that would kind of have some directly senior related programming in there. And that would kind of have some fencing, but also be able to bleed out with kind of a similar design to the plaza that's in between. And then we kind of have the parking kind of pushed to the sides, so that it doesn't get in the way of kind of Cloman Street into the buildings and from the buildings towards the waterfront. So we tried to kind of have those pushed to the sides. We do have some parking up front, but that parking is mainly parallel parking. So it's thinning up the road that's kind of to the north of building A and B. And then we also are calling for some residential stoops, both on the side toward the parking lot and then the sides that are towards the plaza. And we really want to create kind of an active living environment. Next slide. So we did look at some circulation diagrams. So the pink is the cars and the blue is pedestrian. The only kind of cross post we have is right in the front of the building. And again, we're trying to ease that tension by having kind of a, no curb at that entrance so that it feels more pedestrian friendly. And it's also a place where cars, oh, I need to slow down because there's a transition up there. You can notice here the sections A and B. I'm about to show the site sections. So A is cutting towards the townhomes and B is cutting towards the waterfront. So you can see that we have some existing site kind of barriers between the two parcels. So the top one is parcel A to parcel B. You can see there's a steep drop off in between the two. There's kind of a ravine and also kind of a tree buffer that's there existing. And so we wanted to show kind of how our building relates to those townhomes. And then as you can see on the bottom here, this is how the building relates. So it's up higher than the waterfront. I think where this particular section is cut, it kind of raises up again, as you can see to the left. But if you look at kind of the as these buildings get closer to the kind of the bottom point of building B, it kind of is up and then it kind of just lowers down into the water. And so depending on where that's cut, that kind of creates this relationship that we're up high compared to kind of the waterfront walk. This was kind of a stab at looking at what the architecture would look like. So kind of the pink is kind of saying this is where we're going to spend the most focus of our kind of where we want to highlight with the architecture on the facades. And then the purple is kind of secondary focus, although that is still a majority of the building, and also the kind of where we need to really come up with kind of a rhythm of bays down these kind of longer facades. And then the green is kind of that interior courtyard space. Again, we're still working on the architecture, so this is kind of just to give the idea of what we're looking at. And then this is just a massing of the site. And so you can see those corners that are at the entry plaza, we're really starting to form kind of a pop out there that can kind of really invite people in. And you can see kind of how some of these length of these buildings can kind of pull the views towards the water. Again, we're still working on the architecture, but we wanted to and would love to get your feedback on the urban design. I think that is my last slide, so I am done and open for questions. Jeff or Fernando, is there anything that I missed that you wanted to say?
No, you did a great job. Thank you.
I think you've covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It was a very clear presentation, in fact, and very succinct and efficient. I really appreciate it. And we also don't mind the white models. I think it's good to understand what are you thinking about architecturally in terms of general features, but I think as a first pass, it's nice to see it kind of at its very simple kind of reaction to site and why you made certain decisions. And from that point of view, it's very clear and helpful. So thanks for that. I want to give the panel opportunity to ask any additional clarifying questions. I do have a couple that I think the rest will be interested in, and I want to kick it off with. Can we get to the slide that had the site plan and the one that with the circulation? Yeah, this is this one, yeah. Let's start with the site plan first, and then we'll go to circulation, because there's two questions. So the first one is maybe very obvious, but I just want to understand it. The maglev easement that you're showing here that sets the buildings back appears to be continuous over to the future townhome development. How come these buildings are setting back and the other one, we just reviewed it, didn't mention it, and it doesn't have to set back?
Sure, I'll take that one. I'm assuming because you guys are in Baltimore City, you've done lots of affordable housing, UDAAP presentations, but we have to use a lot of government funding sources and a lot of pretty fickle financing tools. This one is going to be using low-income housing tax credits, and the underwriting is incredibly conservative and risk averse. And there's no way that they will provide equity that we need from the tax credits. if there is a risk that the actual structure is in the maglev easement. We can't get title insurance for it. We've already asked our title company, and we're also contemplating a HUD 221D4. Agency loans are even more conservative than our live tech syndicators, and our other option would be some sort of agency, Freddie, Fannie product, and that too will have uber conservative underwriting standards. So I am very confident, 99.99% sure that this will be unfinanceable if building structure is in that easement.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's very helpful. It's good to know. I mean, this is not for you, but for planning, I'd be curious to know how the rest of the parcels on the right-hand side are dealing with that, considering that it's an easement and that for all intents and purposes is something to contend with. Thank you. This is helpful. That answered that quick question. The second one then will be over to the circulation diagram, the next one, sorry. Blanking for a moment. So this is also very clear. My questions would be, right now it seems like per your design, there's 2 vehicular access points into the site. The parking is kind of divided between the 2 programs. And then the pedestrian circulation on the site is clear through that green space between the 2 buildings and around the periphery. My question is what happens beyond that? And maybe for after this, we can jump to another slide where you can show it. But specifically, I see an arrow pointing down, plan down, which is east. And my question is, and you cut some sections, there's some ravines and whatnot there. Does that mean that there's no connection to the promenade and the water? I'm assuming not, because it looked very steep, but I'm just asking, is there any connection to the waterfront? And then the other part will be, and I'll turn it over to you, same thing going in the other direction. How can the residents potentially connect to Annapolis Road or anywhere? I'm thinking again, trying to get to a basic commercial space, you know, coffee, something, milk, for Osborne's comments in a previous presentation. What are the pedestrian circulation options, you know, from Cloman?
Yeah, so I can take that. I might kick that also to Bob. So, and Sean. Let's start with the waterfront connection. So the idea is that there will be a waterfront connection. I believe somebody had a master plan that showed some stairs, you know, a path that would have stairs down to the waterfront. We don't have access necessarily to that design as of yet. I know that this is all part of getting to that point. Sean or Bob, do you guys have any answer to that?
Where the blue arrow is leading south, that per the documents that we have, that is where the future connection will be to the waterfront park. As far as the ravine through section A, we did have some concerns there with the need of a pedestrian bridge or the like to get across on that connection.
Yeah, there are some wetlands in that ravine for section A that are under jurisdiction of the Maryland Department of the Environment, which we would like to avoid, you know, impacting environmentally sensitive areas.
No, surely.
It's also deed restricted too. There's a deed restriction that Pat Turner put on there back in 2007 that forces us to stay out of there as well.
Yeah. My question was more related to section B, that direction and the blue arrow. But I think what I'm understanding is that right now you're planning for a connection that is beyond the parcel that will be part perhaps of the waterfront development that will link you to it. Understood. That answers my question. Let's talk a little bit about, is there any pedestrian connection? And if so, can you trace the path to it, to the neighborhood to the west?
Yeah, so I think we don't have the design of that. We would love to provide, I think, another connection. As of right now, everything goes out to Cloman, and then you're walking along that new sidewalk to get to commercial development on the left or the townhomes on the right. But we just haven't seen what that design of that future commercial development is. I think there is some synergy there that we could definitely get, but it hasn't been developed as far as I know.
Understood. Thank you. This is very helpful as well. I'll reserve my comments for later. I'm going to hand it over to the rest of our team to see if there's anything else that we need to clarify. I'd like to start with Sharon. Sharon, questions for the team?
Actually, the question you asked was my main one, is those connection points and is the expectation that the public will be welcome through there, or is that a private considered courtyard?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it as a little bit of both. I think we want people to, you know, feel like, hey, people live here, but also that it is somewhat open. But I think, you know, from a living perspective, you don't necessarily want to invite everybody into there. So I think what we're trying to create is like with the stoops, with kind of that higher, with the architecture of the amenity spaces and that type of thing, creating an inviting streetscape that is kind of watched by those residents there. So I think that it doesn't really answer your question, but it's kind of like a public-private situation.
It's right. It points up a challenge there, of whether and how much the public access. And then somewhat related to that, what are the entry points to those exterior spaces from the buildings? I saw in those upper corners in the pink with the pink arrows. Where are the other access points to the outside other than the stoops on the outer edges and those top corners? Are there other places where you can exit the building?
Yes, the at the bottom amenities, so like towards the south here, you'll have exit out to spaces here from the building. And then there'll be obviously some egress paths that kind of go out from stairs to the parking lots to the side. And then you'll also have at the senior building from kind of this corner amenity space of building A, you'll also be able to connect to that senior patio back there. So I would say the main spaces are towards the front amenity spaces and towards the waterfront side amenity spaces.
So the common areas connect to the inner spaces and the areas to the east, and the ones on the outer edges are near the parking lots are more private.
Yeah, I would say that we have like egress coming out there, but not a welcoming like come in this way.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Osborne, what are your questions for the team?
Maybe just one or two. So this particular area, you're kind of surrounded by ravines, and arguably you can say you're a little bit slightly elevated. Um, in terms of the orientation of these two building masses, um, I mean, do you really think you're capturing a lot of the views to the water? Because it seems as though the views are more geared towards the east, to the south, to the north. And I recognize you did a number of studies, but um, are there any potential opportunities to even capitalize on the views more? And I think my question is in two parts because it also relates to the arrangement of the parking and the future commercial that's coming to the south, plan to the left of the screen. Um, I'm just curious about that, and primarily because, you know, the program here is for seniors and so forth. There's a sense of reflectiveness that would normally take place at that stage of their lives and a more direct view to the water. I'm wondering if you've actually thought about that in any way.
Sure. Yeah. Let me take a stab at that. So that's a challenge that we're going to be working at with the architecture. I think we're going to be looking at a some angled bays that allow for every apartment to have somewhat of a view of the waterfront from their living space. we looked at the orientation a number of different ways where we kind of oriented one side of the building, you know, the long side of the building to the water. But then we kind of felt like the other side of the building doesn't have, you know, any sort of view of that. So that's something that we're going to be looking at with the articulation of the architecture to try to get people to have views. We also are providing a rooftop amenity at both buildings that'll be towards the water. So everyone will have the opportunity to at least enjoy the kind of best view of the water from the top floor at each building. So those are kind of the two things we're looking at, but it's not fully resolved because we haven't gotten into the architecture detailing yet.
And then my second question as a follow-on to that is, I mean, have you studied Masson where potentially building B or building A is literally maybe a story taller than building B?
Mhm. No, we can't afford that. We have to stay to 4 stories, wood frame, slab on grade, in order to meet Maryland DHCD cost limits. So we are definitely, capped by our tools as well.
I'm not suggesting that you add a story. I'm suggesting that you modify the footprint of building B a bit so you can come down a story.
No, then we'll lose density and it won't be feasible. These are affordable housing units, and I do want to address this really quickly.
Sure.
This is in what's called a qualified census tract, which affords us a lot of points for the competitive round and also additional tax credit equity. What's been happening, I live in Federal Hill, I've lived here for a long time. What I've noticed in the areas that are starting to see development is these qualified census tracts are starting to disappear. Sharp Leadenhall was in one for a long time. It's not anymore. Over in Pigtown, we're 1100 Wycomico. Now that's disappeared. So with the development of this waterfront site, and what I'm really, just want everyone to keep in mind as we're looking holistically about this being affordable housing, as soon as the townhouses start to go up in parcel B, it's going to change the economic makeup of this census tract, and we are definitely at risk of losing it. And once that happens, the promise that we've made to the community of providing a bulwark of affordable housing for them to enjoy, and this is one of 2 potential affordable housing developments that are actually on the water. The other one's in Annapolis. So we have a real amazing chance here now, right, before we lose this very important federal designation in the next maybe 2 years, to to move forward. So again, I appreciate the comments, but I also know that I want the board to know that as affordable housing developers, we have so many different masters that really handcuff us. So I just wanted that for some context.
Thanks. Appreciate your thoughts
You're
and
welcome.
comments. And my last question relates to the commercial at the corner. That's not part of your team, right? Got it.
But
Okay.
we're collaborating with the contract purchaser. I go up to Timonium to work with Stonewall on projects Wednesday. So there's a lot of collaboration synergy. So yes, we are 100% committed to support the contract purchaser's goals on the future development parcel on parcel A, and want to make sure that we could do what we can do with our design to help them.
That's good to know you collaborated because you'll hear in my comments, and that's one of the reasons for the pointed comments about pointed questions about the Masson and so
Yeah.
forth, what you've studied, because I think there are still opportunities here that may not be fully explored, and you might be precluding, in my mind, some additional opportunities, which will rely in part on the commercial and how that's placed on the site as well. But
Yeah.
I'll address those in my comments. Those are my questions, Paulina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Osborne, and thank you, Jeff, for the additional insight. I think it's really helpful. I would also like to address some comments related to equity and things like that when we get to it.
Right.
Kevin, what are your questions for the team? And once you're done with those, could you please offer your comments as well? Thank you.
Just one question in it, because I had the same maglev and connectivity questions. Thank you for that. But I guess like just from the philosophy or just foundational principles of this project from the team's perspective, do you see these buildings kind of participating as an integrated part of the greater Westport neighborhood, or is there sort of like a conscious decision to, where you want to treat it as a kind of an island, and you don't see that there's necessarily a value add to your future residents or that kind of thing for having that kind of integration? I'm kind of curious about the additives. I think that will color some of the remarks, urban design implications of that.
I guess I don't really. I'm trying to understand the question. Is the question, are we offering an opportunity for residents to, enjoy the waterfront site? Is it our standalone insulated? What's the question?
Yeah, is it part of the broader Westport master plan vision that there's, that it participates in this vision for an interconnected public realm? That's like where the sum is greater than the individual parts, I guess. Or is it the idea that this is, or do you need and want this to be a kind of a standalone piece that has, more control and security and just that kind of thing?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I guess the previous iteration of the master plan had this contemplated as affordable housing, this corner. So, it was attractive to us to pursue it. But the idea all along was to be, a participant with One Westport, where the whole master plan was to bring the community access to the water by redeveloping industrial parcels that, always walled off, the community from the water. So we're not going to have a fence around this. We're not going to have security roaming and kicking people out. We want to connect to the Middle Branch, reimagined Middle Branch Heritage Trail. I don't know if you knew this, but I'm also working on the Baltimore Black Sox project, which is, so it really, like, even my participation is really integrated with, the entire waterfront. So we've requested meetings with the Westport Community Group a few times. We've not been granted that permission yet. We continue to try. So we honestly, truly believe that, and again, I've seen this since I've lived here since '98. Remember what happened when Pat Turner came along? All speculators came and bought up houses and shells in Westport. Now that this thing is really, it's gonna happen. The same thing's gonna happen to these speculators, and I really love the idea of making sure that folks that are displaced in Westport can just go across the tracks and stay in their neighborhood and have really great housing and even a better location. So I hope that answered your question. That was kind of roundabout, but I hope.
Thanks. That's really helpful. All this background context is really useful. It's, I guess, if I'm, roll into my comments, I mean, I do think that there isn't like I think that, all of the hurdles you're representing about like getting this across the finish line, like whether it's the financing and the or the timing out of a certain designation because once the process developed, I think it's still possible to get amazing site design plan and also have a uniform project, and that's sort of like why you working with these talented designers and that. And my first reaction really to this plan is that it feels like a complete kind of island unto itself, and in some cases that's an appropriate response. I mean, like especially if you have, for example, like security needs, or if it's like more medical or this or that. But the idea that it's kind of meant to be a part of this broader vision, I think we all know that the best affordable projects anywhere really are integrated fully and seamlessly into their neighborhoods. They tend to become less of them over there versus everyone else, and I think this sort of is going to be experienced. I think you're not going to have people. You're going to have security because no one's going to want to walk into that, because it doesn't feel like a place you should walk to, right? And I know part of this is like the maglev setback, but it seems like a strange, ridiculous like constraint that you have, which I feel your pain with that one. That it doesn't really make any sense. But then to have that then result in basically like these two buildings surrounded by parking lots. I mean, you have stoops opening up, which is great, like individual opening from the building, but that implies like a streetscape, but this isn't a streetscape. It stoops looking up at a parking lot, and yeah, those just have a sort of a limited. You're not kind of getting the full bang for your buck on those kind of like features. Really, it's sort of it just feels like there's not a way that this, there's a difference when you're in a city, you have a building that either creates edges of streets and has like this public to private spectrum, the transition of to less private to more private, or you have the opposite of that, which is just a freestanding building, like if you're pulling up like a Homeland Suites off of a highway exit somewhere. Like there's two different visions of urbanism, and my impression of the overall West vision for Westport is of one that is of a walkable, livable, dynamic urbanism, and this seems to be the island in the middle of that. And again, like if there's some other kind of constraints or sort of or reasons why that's like sort of the intent and it's the only way this can get across the finish line, then I guess that's sort of, it's a shame. But if there's still room, I think, to maybe kind of improve on some of that, it would be, I think, hugely beneficial, not just to the experience of the broader vision, but also I think to the residents who live there, who might feel like they can just kind of go out and meander comfortably like along a complete street, like on Pullman Street as a complete street. Doesn't it, you would never have kind of a parallel street of parking. Maybe it's more or less open space area, just something to kind of make people feel like they're a part of a larger neighborhood. And I think especially being so close to light rail, like the kind of using suburban typologies and site planning methodologies, like is not really defensible from a best practice point of view. So I guess that those are kind of my primary comments. And I think the parking is also limiting. Like I think this was something that Osborne was alluding to. Like you might want to like have if you just embrace the fact that like this isn't like traditional lucky just fit within the like fit within a tight grid like that. Maybe you can actually skew some of the wings to maximize views and make it a little bit more responsive to the shape of your site and allow more people to have these amazing balconies and views out to the out to the parks, park and water. But you're kind of being hemmed in by this parking thing. So I know that you have limitations on structure, but like a 4/1, but where the one can be parking at the base, maybe that's again, that's not the most urban typology, but it's more urban than in the sea of parking. So maybe there's an option where you look at like trying to tuck some of the parking in to a base and allowing the landscape of the site to read a little bit more interconnected with the other urban spaces. So I think I'll just leave it at that. But I just feel like that there's something inherently from a site planning point of view, that's not going to offer, I think, the residents the kind of experience that they could have in this amazing site.
Right, and those are absolutely fair comments and questions. And I did push our property management company as hard as I could and say, all right, what kind of parking do you need to lease this thing up? Because in the end, they do need to perform. And that's why we're so light on parking. We're not doing 1-to-1, and we were able to push and be more aggressive there. And there's also a choice, like, well, where do we want to put all these different, programmatic elements that we need to, and do we want to embrace the waterfront and, or, which is, the place where we think people will, spend more time and enjoy. So that's why we thought on the sides, there wasn't as much value from a people enjoyment from being collected for Cloven versus down this beautiful waterfront park that's going to connect all sorts of neighborhoods. So I'm just saying, like, I hear you and I do appreciate you acknowledging that, you understand that we have restrictions too. So thank you.
Thank you both. I think you will hear some additional suggestions and thoughts along the way. We're hoping to be helpful today. So
thank you.
The goal here is for you to walk away. I mean, we're all agreeing quite a bit, and you will hear it in terms of what's working and what isn't, and kind of what we would all want for this project. And hopefully you'll walk away with some actionable items that can help evolve the project. So thank you both for this. Osborne, what are your comments for the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I heard from you, Jeff, is, there's a concerted effort to reach out and communicate and coordinate with your neighbors, right? And I think that's extremely positive for a project like this. I'm not trying to upset the apple cart here, and I'm just asking your team to just take one quick look at something, right? Which is the relationship between the commercial, and as you progress, let's say north, which would be towards the right of the screen, and you move towards your property, you have to kind of think in terms of a couple of things. One, what exactly that future development can be. You may not know exactly what it is, but what can it be? And two, how does that begin to relate to what we're proposing here? And then the third piece of that is the benefits of the site, the view, the ravine. There's a kind of a quietness about this corner of the site when compared with everything else we've seen in the master plan earlier today. So what I'm suggesting is, even if this were to be done on a napkin, and then maybe the next time around you present it to us and you say, well, it really doesn't work, right? I would really appreciate that, right? Because I'm sure you're at some stage, with your project, and it'll be a little bit difficult to backtrack all the way, but I'm just asking you to consider this. So
We came to you early because we knew we wanted
well,
to
hear
work
me,
with you. Yeah, we're
understand,
not.
but hear me
Yeah,
out a second. Hear me
yeah.
out a second. Okay. So one thing here is, I think what's challenging for me is kind of what Kevin is alluding to, and I'm sure you're going to hear this from Pavlina and from Sharon. When you kind of look at the plan, you're placing this building and you're wrapping it with parking, right? And I understand why I think you're doing it, right? And you clearly pushing the envelope in terms of you're getting 1.5 as opposed to the 1.1. We get all that. But what if, for some reason, you were to kind of figure out a way to cluster the parking? And I think you began to examine that a little bit in the studies you've presented, but there's, I think, one more study that you probably should look at. What if all of this parking were clustered, let's say up against the parcel, which would be to the south of your buildings here, up against the parcel adjacent to the commercial, right? And I'll explain that why in a minute, right? What that does is it kind of takes the building mass and all of the configuration and pushes it to the right, closer to the ravine, closer to the green elements that are there. It also allows you an opportunity to even play with that massing of building A in terms of its size, its footprint, or even you can even crank that a little bit, right? And in the process of cranking it, it now affords whatever configuration you place there a lot more positive views towards the water. What it also does is it begins to rationalize the idea of these stoops walking out, not necessarily onto asphalt, but maybe a private walkway that's shared or balanced or mediates between the ravine and your buildings and your units. What it also can do is create a little bit more unique space in between buildings A and buildings B, building B, that kind of opens up the view more for building A. So I'm just suggesting just that simple move begins to really improve and embrace the site condition a lot better. I mean, the other thing is, if potentially you run into issues, then you modify the footprint a little bit of building B, bring it down to 4 stories, maybe all of it or most of it would be 3 stories as opposed to 4, and you're still able to realize the densities that you're suggesting there. So I think that's kind of the heart of most of what I'm trying to say or suggest to you as a team. There's a lot more involved, but I'll reserve that. I'll reserve my time and I'll give it back to Pavlina and to Sharon so at least they can have an opportunity to comment. The one other very quick thing is, by kind of coupling all of the parking to the south of these buildings, now you have the opportunity maybe to utilize a single curb cut as opposed to 2 curb cuts. Good. What it also does is it gives the developer of the commercial a little bit more flexibility in terms of how they will begin to approach that lot. For instance, their building may be along, I can't remember the name of that street.
Waterview.
Waterview. Their building may be along Waterview, and perhaps a portion of it can potentially front onto Cloman. But it gives them the chance to now kind of put all that park and nest it kind of behind the building. So at least Cloman begins to really feel more like a kind of a a more urban kind of a field, has a more
Mhm.
urban feel to it, without necessarily compromising any of the views, any of the interactional interfaces to the the more to the parks, I guess, to the
Yeah.
east there. So I guess that's the crux of my comments, and I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. I love those suggestions. My architects, hopefully they love them too. I mean, it sounds good to me, but they're the ones moving the pieces. But thank you.
Thank you, Osborne. I have additional ones. They are in that direction, though. I think you'll hear a few options. I think I believe that you have the pieces of the puzzle on the table,
Mhm.
and and possibly a very close configuration when it comes to just the four-story building, the simplicity of that. We understand that those are all financial and programmatic limitations, but I think that with respect to the site plan and how things are organized and oriented, the pieces of the puzzle are here, but there are a couple of studies that need to be done that I think can help you improve this dramatically within at least the control that you have. And we'll talk a little bit about some things that you don't have control of that also need to support your project. All right, we'll hear from Sharon next, and then I'll round out with a few more suggestions. Sharon, what are your comments for the team?
Well, your comments are a great segue because that's exactly where I was going to. And I'm sure my architecture colleagues will have all sorts of great building massing ideas. And I agree with everything that Osborne has said. But what I think is working here, as Pavlina has alluded to, that I hope you hold on to, is the integration into the landscape. And I just really welcome the movement of the park to the east into your site, and it's interwoven amongst the buildings. And I think that is a very strong statement. It does give both functional and visual access to the outdoors immediately on the site, to the park to the east, to the water. You feel connected because those fingers of nature are coming up into your site. So I hope as you are remassing the buildings that's an element that can be maintained. And I think there's an equitable nature to this, and I understand Osborne's point about, well, nobody's directly facing the water, but sort of everybody is obliquely. So everybody gets some kind of sense of an angled view at least, and even if nobody gets the direct view. Because if somebody gets the direct view, somebody else gets nothing at all. So I appreciate the challenge, but I also I acknowledge the equitable nature of what you're trying to do there right now, and so I hope that is something that you're able to maintain in some way or other.
Mhm.
Um, and to, getting into the details a little bit, I like the direction that the courtyards are going, because again, the meander, I think, works, and it starts to mitigate the linearity of those spaces. And so again, addressing the scale of and the shapes, the geometries of the space, I think is moving in the right direction. So again, you feel connected to nature, and it's just not a long linear pathway through there. It creates moments of pause and view sheds to nature that I think are welcoming. Where I was going with the public access, I do think one of your big challenges is to decide, is there public access through your site? And I would encourage it, because we keep hearing about the isolation of this neighborhood and the disconnect to the water. What we were talking about with the previous group is we need to welcome people to the waterfront. We cannot provide barriers and privatize that edge. So wherever you can welcome people to the waterfront, I think we should be encouraging that. But I get your point. I mean, people want to feel a sense of safety and security and privacy in their own homes immediately outside their front doors. So your challenge is to somehow provide both an access point that is intentional and safe and welcoming, but that also maintains the sense of privacy of your residents. And Kevin had some suggestions with the previous group of, there's their vertical separation, if you can't get horizontal separation, and there are creative ways to go about that. So I think that access should be provided and then designed with intentionality. I am absolutely on board with the previous comments about coordinating with the neighbors here and making a cohesive effort from north to south along this edge. It's going to be so important both in how they're relating to each other from a circulation standpoint. Visually, is there cohesion amongst their coordinating closely with field operations to create those strong accessible connections, especially right here at this one of the big parts of that park. And even to create materials palettes that are consistent so that there's not this some odd visual dividing line at the eastern edge of your property where suddenly it's a new palette. Because you've done such a great job at drawing that park into your site, let's make it feel like that park has entered your site and that these residents are sitting in the park. So even the planting materials palette and the paving materials palette can be cohesive with that park so that you create that park-like setting that you started to set up here already. I think that can be extremely strong. And then similarly, what is that relationship to the community to the north, to the commercial building to the south? And one of the easiest ways to do that, one of the most straightforward opportunities here is Cloman Street and creating a very strong streetscape vocabulary that ties it all together so you feel like you're part of a community and not a series of separate developments. I think that's going to be really critical here. I think those are the main points because the other panelists are really covering what the other thoughts that I had were. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, very much. Yeah, I think you're hearing a lot of ideas that are along the same lines. Mine are also that way. I would like to step back though a little bit and cover some of the thoughts and questions and comments we had kind of from the beginning. And I want to start with elements that are outside of your property. And the comments aren't so much for you because you don't necessarily have control over that,
Right.
but we're offering comments to planning department here as part of the larger coordination thing. And one thing that stuck out to me is when you were talking about the site and how these sites are disappearing from the more valuable suddenly or more profitable areas of town. And this is a prime example of this, the moment development starts and kicks off, all of a sudden, there's like a lot more interest in projects like that get pushed out and things like that. So from that point of view, it's extremely important that this project succeeds and in fact ends up being one of the examples of how similar sites can be integrated in these more high value developments, adjacent to single family waterfront homes, right? And to do that, I think we need to touch in a very meaningful, direct and kind of recognizable way on the equity piece of a development that is nestled in here. And I remember from the very first, and this is probably something we're going to discuss in the afternoon with the master plan, kind of the bigger picture ideas of this. So I remember our discussions when this project came as a vision plan and this word equity was getting thrown around a lot. And we zeroed in on it then. And it's like, listen, equity can't be just this thing of like, we're just going to do really good. We're going to do better and we're going to do good. There was like a color I remember assigned to every single type of intervention that was happening in the plan, but there was no color assigned to equity. I was like, I want you to pick a color. And when this plan is complete, I want to see it marked like where the equity piece is happening, if you're going to be true to those sort of things. So with respect to a project like this, I would say that the site is already very isolated from the waterfront. I'm sorry, but we see so many hundreds of linear feet right now of townhouses that are going to get like the front row to this, newly built public park, right? And the affordable housing piece is tucked into the corner here, and there's really no connection through the ravines and stuff like that. I will be looking into the master plan for that colorful illustration of how the equity is achieved so that residents that are part of this parcel have the best possible connection to the waterfront. I realize that it's not going to be the same as the folks that are just lined up there looking at the water, but I would be looking for something that really is comparative to the density that you're providing and how those residents can actually get there. I don't know that stairs are sufficient. I would like for seniors to be able to get and various levels of ability to the waterfront. So
Yeah.
to me, this is an extremely important connection. I believe that as far as your plan is concerned, a blue arrow pointing to connect to us somewhere in this location is probably all you can do at this point. But I would be looking for in the future developments of the waterfront plan and your project that this becomes a very important and meaningful connection, whether it's in that exact same location or other preferred one that is more doable, affordable, and equitable, will be extremely important. So from that point of view, these are the opportunities for this plan to do right. And, you know, I'll be looking for those. Similarly, I have to say is the connection on the other side, you know, through Cloman, considering that the site is bound by topography and other things on each side. It's important to recognize that the direct connection is again, you know, into the neighborhood to the west is again adjacent to the public park and the, you know, townhouses and stuff like that. And residents of this site have to walk around, right? And there's like very limited connectivity for this site that isn't, again, within your boundary.
Right.
So it's a question again to the master plan of how can we make sure that all of the pieces of the Westport development actually have the same equitable or similar connection to future commercial development. It's significantly easier for folks north of your site to get across the tracks and go get that milk and that coffee, and significantly more difficult for your site. So I think there's something to be talked about with respect to the connection of the site to the rest of it. And so these are the comments that I had with respect to things that are outside of your plan, like the ones that you probably can't impact, but I think you should consider, continue to discuss, negotiate, and otherwise keep track of, because it's extremely important to the success of this project. The rest of the things have to do with the things you can control and how you lay out the site so that you can actually, in fact, make it feel less isolated. So that's the extent to the comments you've heard earlier, and the ones that I'm going to offer to you in addition to this is about what are the kind of things that you can do to use the site, which has some degree of isolation and kind of disconnectedness from the rest of the pieces, and help it either feel or work in a more connected way. And to do that, we should go around the edges of the site and really describe their and three masses of the two oriented kind of position situation. There's like courtyards tucked in between them, and then there's parking in a similar orientation that kind of rims it, but also straddles it. With respect to your plan, positioning the parking between the additional programs, and I would call the green space to the right here a program, just for simplicity of the conversation, but it is a green buffer. It is something that significantly better than if it wasn't there. It could have been, you know, much worse. So I think it's, if you can look at that as an asset. And then on the left side, the plan left, you also have future commercial development, and there's kind of more parking that straddles that. So by positioning the parking on the periphery of the building, you're further exacerbating the conditions that are already limiting the site in terms of both perceived and physical isolation. It kind of crams the buildings together. It creates kind of these narrow courtyard conditions, and further pushes the buildings away north and south from anything else that's kind of beyond it. So you already heard suggestions about simply taking the masses that you've set up and starting to shift them along the side. Part of my suggestion, and you know, Osborne covered it earlier, was to study shifting building B further to the north, so that out of the stoops, out of the windows, you have this looking over a green space, a green ravine. I think immediately that starts to feel like, oh, I'm part of the park. I'm part of this whole green ecological thing that runs around the water and comes up, you know, into the neighborhood. And my building is in the woods. It's in the in the landscape. I think that actually is something within the urban environment very rare. Everyone has a sidewalk and a street and a parking lot of some sorts, and cars parked right side of their doorstep. This actually is something really, really great, and it allows you to create like this entirely different kind of quality of life and lifestyle. What that would do automatically actually is decompress the space. Right now we have 50 feet between building A and B, and certainly building A's north facade has view corridors towards the water. Like simply pulling them apart is starting to improve significantly the view shed for both buildings. And not to mention kind of creates a slightly more breathing room. It seems to me like the buildings are pretty tight together. And then that leads me to kind of think about then that space, the 50-foot kind of courtyard space in between. I think the 50-foot is just a function of the proportions of the buildings and how they need to work, and then the parking on each side. So it kind of condensed it further. And I really appreciate at this stage thinking of it as an amenity, thinking of it as like as a connectivity and things like that. But I do have to question the blue line that was connecting it kind of as a vertical circulation, and kind of this question of it, is it public, is it private? It is awkward and it is difficult because it is too narrow for it to really feel public. I think to similar comments that I had in the previous presentation in terms of this ambiguity of people feeling, am I supposed to be here or not, right? I think this particular space, the 50-foot width with private windows on each side, is not going to feel public ever. Nobody is ever going to really feel comfortable and confident enough walking through it. And I'm not sure that you necessarily want it to be that way, at least within the proportions that you've designed. I think the meandering path is lovely, but I think it suggests more intimacy as opposed to kind of like more direct connection into a waterfront. Not to mention that the direct connection to the waterfront in that particular situation is really questionable. So with all of these other ways to get to the water, would people really be cutting between the very narrow space between your buildings to get to the water? And is that really something that you want? So I think it's a good idea. I think you should have it on the plan, but I think you should consider whether it happens there and in that particular spatial configuration. Which leads me to my next suggestion, the idea of like taking your puzzle pieces and shifting them around. I really think that if you take that feature and you actually design it on the side of Cloman, you're actually going to do a whole lot more for the site feeling connected to everything and really inviting and part of kind of an urban, ecological urban experience than if you simply squeeze it between the two buildings. Think about it from this point of view. Like right now, if you look at the experience on Cloman, you have that kind of central axis that is the entry plaza, but it's just this one point of entry somewhere in the middle of the street there. And then there's like the two curb cuts on the side. And, you know, of course, a decent green buffer of trees and perhaps shrubs. It really doesn't create this inviting experience along Cloman. But imagine if, you know, some of the green areas and some of the hangout spaces actually start to work from the face of the building and out into the street and create kind of more of a connection, then more of an inviting connection, not in between the buildings, but kind of into the site, and then finding an appropriate path to start to connect people to the water. I think by relocating that green space, it would also start to reinforce this idea that you're in a park setting. So that same green buffer that you have running on the north, all of a sudden starts with these more urban pockets to dance along the west side of the site and really create this lovely kind of gateway green buffer zone that you can nest parking into meanwhile. So imagine, for example, and I can't draw here, like I don't have access to rectangles, but imagine, for example, just for clarification here, those 6 parking spaces that you have. I'm looking at the vehicular access on the right, curb cut, right? You get curb cut, and then you have these 6 parking spaces. Imagine instead of them being two-sided parking, imagine if they're simply oriented in the direction that the rest of your parking is happening. You can still tuck in 6 parking spaces, but then imagine the rest of the space that you have then left becomes kind of like this forecourt hangout plaza kind of experience, you know, in front of the building. So whether you're coming or going or you're arriving at the building, there's like, to this point, like this idea of like the layering, right? It's not just a street and a sidewalk and then a parking lot. It's now a forecourt, and then it becomes kind of a hangout space when you get closer to the building and all of that. So it allows you to layer all of those things that in fact make the building feel more connected and more welcoming rather than isolated. It's the difference between the urban and the suburban condition. And in no disparaging way, I think there is no really, the difference kind of if we have to look at it at face value is that in a suburban environment, there's really no public, right? It's a conglomeration of private experiences connected by a road system, which is why, you know, you drive to everywhere just to get from point A to point B. The difference kind of with the so-called urban design and kind of the idea of urbanity is that although we're still part of a private property, this idea of connectedness, of openness, of public experience, whether it's just even visual, is reinforced by design. So by switching between this very clear barrier, curb cut, parking lot, our property, your sidewalk, but switching it in a design sense to sort of like, you know, hangout area in this public zone where it could be residents and it could be the public, but they're not squeezed between my buildings. They're sort of in this public realm, close to the sidewalk and where the public experience should be happening, is the difference between the urban design and the suburban design. Does that make sense? I hope it does. And if not, we can talk about it more.
Yeah, I hope my designers understand that.
We're doing sketches over here as we're listening.
So my background, I'm actually a licensed civil engineer turned to developer. So like all this other stuff, I'm like, okay, my landscape architects and architects, that's the language they hear. So hopefully they got it. So if you guys understand that, that's good with me, and you know, that sounds great.
Yeah. So thank you for sketching these out. I think these are the kind of studies, and again, I was saying, just with moving the puzzle pieces around, that you can start to evaluate what's happening and how it could work. So there's that idea, right, of wrapping up the green space and whatnot. So this is one. Thank you for understanding it and for following. It's hard to like talk it through. Drawings is what we do. It explains it a lot quicker. So that was part of the alignment that I had with what Osborne was discussing.
Great.
And he was talking indeed about kind of consolidating a lot of parking on the other side. I would think this is a good beginning spot, and I sort of started right, you know, to the east. We're going to connect. We need to connect to the waterfront in a meaningful way. To the north, perhaps that green space is an asset to the project, and it can wrap around and allow for other connections to happen, and then really actually start to improve the Cloman Street experience, both for the project and for the public experience. What I would suggest, so I believe this is what Osborne was talking about. What I would suggest also your study is actually keeping building A where it was, because I feel like one of the issues with this is that it gets the parking a little bit far away from building B, which is difficult. And I would actually, as I was telling you earlier, try to separate the buildings apart. So remember that courtyard, the 50-foot courtyard there is not necessarily that feature anymore. That's distributed along your Cloman experience, so that you have kind of these programmatic hangout spaces, but also a green buffer with the street, and it sort of does a lot of things for you. So I think there's an opportunity to keep your parking close to B. You sort of flip it, right? You put the building closer to the green space, and you flip the parking a little bit closer on this side, and keep building A away from it, so that then you can provide view shed corridors and things like that. And maybe it's that kind of parking area and all of that that creates more of a street feel through it. And that is the way that you may take people. So not through your private spaces, not through this ambiguity of like, should I be hanging out here or not? Do they want me here or not? But if your parking lot is actually more designed as a street and as a streetscape, so you still get all of your parking on it, but then people feel like, oh, this is part of these other streets that are happening in the townhome development that I can get to the water from, then you don't have any more ambiguity. So in other words, you're making the buildings feel like they're two separate blocks. And they have a street in between, and you're getting all of your parking done, but people don't feel like I shouldn't be walking here, right? And then you provide that kind of connection there. And then you distribute a lot of the other green spaces kind of to the west, where the extension of the plaza is, or rather the new plaza is along the west side. I'm sorry, is that west? Yeah, west, rather than in between the buildings. And so I think that starts to create some legibility. Right now, we just designed two separate blocks with a parking in between that's still convenient to be, but it has more of kind of that language for more and then we really take a buffer just to create some of these transitionary kind of semi-public, semi-private spaces. I think it's worth studying it from that perspective, and then evaluate and see, is this better? Am I getting what I needed to get out of this? Is this, you know, in your 3D studies, I love the white model because it just takes away for a moment the noise of the architecture, and it really looks at it at face value of like, what is this doing spatially and equitably from that point of view? So I would be interested to see whether that works. So these are suggestions that are saying, please try it. Maybe it will be better. These are not like you must change it. You're still on the hook to make this work. and to make it successful. But I think it needs to be studied. We need to see it. And whether you decide to go in this direction or not, like Osborne was saying, we would love to see that it was vetted and it was considered. I mean, it's very quick to do these sketches. And I think even just shifting the masses, it's a worthwhile exploration at this time. And lastly, I would say, so now we discussed kind of all of the edges around the north, and then I would do the plaza, and I would call it not extension of the plaza, but like the whole plaza across that edge, and understand that there will be perforations, right? There will be a perforation to get to. So maybe there's like a north plaza and a south plaza, you know, to get through the street kind of in the middle. But the reality is along Cloman, it will feel continuous and it will feel like this really generous, gorgeous forecourt to your building. And then you can tuck in your parking spaces, you know, kind of the more visitor related ones and drop off related ones as part of the plaza, kind of sideways. And so then we're down to kind of the last edge, which is on the south side. And you already mentioned, you know, you're going to have conversations with the commercial development. Right now in your plan, there is no kind of connection conceptualized because perhaps you don't know what's happening on the other side or not. This is your opportunity, fully within your control, to make it, you know, work so that both your plaza and that commercial space or even your residents can get to that commercial. I don't know if it's going to be a 7-Eleven or whatever. We don't know what commercial program it's going to be, but to the extent to which it's an asset to your development, you will be doing your project a service if you provide for that direct access and not just simply like go walk across that parking lot.
Something
but
real.
as the extension of that plaza. And all of a sudden, if you manage to build these connections north and south along Cloman for your entire project and then serve your buildings with parking and still create drop-offs and still have a equitable, not confusing kind of connection to the waterfront, you know, I think you're checking a lot of your boxes. And I will argue at this time, your project will have a far more successful kind of street frontage and urban design experience than anything we've seen north of you with the single family townhomes at this stage, who are simply not designing for it. I think it will both improve the quality of design from urban design perspective, but it would also improve the quality of the project internally in terms of how it works with its surroundings and that it's really leveraging every single asset you have around the site there. And it's a thinking that I would like you guys to continue to reinforce in the sense of how can I make the best use of everything that I'm given, even if it looks initially as a limitation, even if it looks as something that perhaps is not, you know, desirable. This is the kind of project that needs to be very resourceful and really turn everything into an opportunity. And I believe you're on that way, on that pathway. And I'm very confident that this will continue to evolve and be successful. That's the extent of my comments. Very quickly, I'm looking through my notes. The public access portion, I think it needs to be clear. You're either providing public access and it's designed in a way that doesn't, you know, cause ambiguity and conflict, or you don't, you know. And in this particular case, this site, as isolated as it is, as you're getting it, can be so much more connected. And these are some ideas of how to get it, like you've heard from everybody, you know, various ways. All right, so we're almost close to time. We started a little late. I want to give some time to the rest of the panelists to see if they have any additional comments that perhaps we didn't cover when we were going one by one. Panelists, anything else to add for the team?
I don't, thank you.
Oh, nothing other than it's rare to see the panel kind of get a little bit deep into your design and to have the team work on the fly to, you know, reflect that. And I think that's very appreciative from our standpoint, certainly from mine.
You're welcome.
And it kind of gives me a level of reassurance that the next time we see this, it'll certainly be further improved. So good luck to you.
No, thank you. And so when we're working with Ren, she did let me know that usually when folks have affordable housing projects, they come to UDAAP after the application's already approved. And we wanted to make sure we came to you before we even submitted anything to the state. We wanted to make sure that what we presented to the state was something that we wouldn't have to, you know, retrade with them. And, you know, just also by virtue of working with Ray for the last 3 years on Cloman Street and everything, we had a really, you know, good opportunity to integrate, and we're going to leverage that as well. So two of the items you mentioned, the off-site things that we don't have control over, there are some things we can do. And I'm going to offer this up to Brad. The access to the water, stairs are not very accessible, but it looks like we have a lot of green space down there, and we would be absolutely open to granting an easement. So if Brad wants to go and do a switchback and well-lit connection, I will absolutely offer, an easement to put some of his facilities on our property. And the relation with our commercial development, talking to Ryan, at first, our design intent of making it urban with the entrances. Now I'm seeing that we have an opportunity to have two separate entrances more spread out. Ryan asked me, am I open to having a shared driveway entrance with the commercial? I'm like, I don't think we can because we have to be more urban, but now with the feedback, that's absolutely a possibility. So having a shared driveway entrance with a shared easement with the commercial folks, if that's beneficial to them, we will absolutely do that too, if it lays out with our site, which it seems like it should. So I just wanted to let you know that we're here to collaborate with everyone. And also just to thank you for a lot of the good input and also hearing me on the constraints that we really do have with these tools. So sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it does help to hear about the constraints. I think it's important that this is a dialogue and it helps us be hopefully more useful and more helpful. In this particular case, thank you for entertaining this and sketching with us. Like I said before, these are suggestions and the design team is more than capable of solving all of that. This still needs to work. And but these are just certain things to try and vet, and hopefully they help you. Just to double check with Kevin. Kevin, did you say you had anything else to add? No?
I think it was a great fruitful discussion, and again, appreciate the collaborative spirit. And I think there's some really interesting ideas out there, and that you're on a good path.
Great, thank you, Kevin, and thank you to the entire project team. This was a great start. I think, like we said, all of the pieces are on the table, and it's just about making them work even better for you. Planning, any additional comments to add?
No comments, just wanted to thank the panel and the project team for a really good review, and I will circle back with the project team. I've got some notes. I'll send you draft notes as soon as I've got them cleaned up, and we're going to break for lunch. We'll see everybody back at 1:30.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.
So.
Thank you.